recoiling in horror.
Ricola.
I'm watching for the notification email to go out here.
There we go. Morning, Paul. Morning, Melody.
Yeah. We can talk to the people who are already here.
The people.
The people. The same. The crowd. The gang.
The gang. Steve's in Atlanta for work, so he won't be here. He's in the air.
My daughter is at Walt Disney World. I'm like, what?
Why?
Oh, I love it because she's very practical, right? So rather than go on your honeymoon after your marriage, you go before. There's some questions here, but let's not ask those. Because if you go right now, it's 40% cheaper than if you go in a month. I'm like, okay. Whatever.
That is smart, actually.
It's totally, they look at the rates of 40% savings and we can go to Disney World. I'm like, yeah, good. All right.
How old is she now?
19.
19. Well, there you go.
Yeah. It's like, no, I have no control at 19. Totally done. Gone.
Yeah.
Yep. It's good. I never really had control. That was all a deceit. Oh, look, I got an email. Christopher Hitchins. God is not great. Okay.
There we go. So today we're kind of recording and not recording, but do you want to hit the bump music? We'll just dive right in.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right.
Well, let me do it again because it's kind of quiet. Let's see.
Morning, Carrie. Good to see you. Hear you. See you, hear you. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is the Banned Books Podcast, episode number 110, 20, 211. I don't know.
It's right up on the screen.
Oh, yeah, there it is, right there, 209. It's Monday morning. Ivermectin works. Men are too soft, women are too hard, and that's Christopher Gillespie.
Chilling and willing, maxing and relaxing. What are you doing? Some prophylactic ivermectin? I love saying prophylactic.
I know, it's fun, isn't it? It's just a fun word to me. I don't know.
It is a fun word. And it's not usually used in the context of like preventative medical treatment.
No, it's not. It always reminds me of a turtleneck sweater.
That's good. Love it.
I don't know why. I just associate the word prophylactic with a turtleneck. I just always have. But yeah, we're going to dive back into an ongoing conversation we're having with atheists. And we're going to go from Nietzsche today to Christopher Hitchens, who died as recently as 2011. So you might be more familiar with him. And if not, you are invited to go to YouTube, where he has copious amounts of lectures and debates, conversations, lots of video material of Christopher Hitchens that you can, and his brother Peter, by the way, debated his brother, which several times. And if you're not aware of how those events went, two brothers debated each other about the existence of God. And I don't know if you have siblings, but if you've ever argued about what's going to be served for Thanksgiving, imagine what it's like listening to two intellectuals argue about God who grew up in the same house.
All right. So 1949 to 2011.
Correct.
English American. So I didn't know that. Is that true?
Dual citizenship.
Okay. Yep. Public intellectual. Mainly, he was part of the what was called radical atheistic, right? The radical atheists.
New atheists.
New atheist. That's it. Yeah, an anti-theist, I guess, is what we might say, right?
He died in Houston, Texas, by the way.
Did he really?
Yeah, he ended his life in Texas, like any real man would.
Oh, I see how that works. But he was with that whole train of thought, he was very much opposed to the way that religious traditions seem to be associated with authoritarianism and hurtful and harmful ideologies, which, he's not entirely wrong.
No, I read God Is Not Great, and I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. And
the book, not the essay.
Yeah, the book. And it probably influenced my book quite a bit, kind of subconsciously or subversively, just because.
I think did you acknowledge that in the foreword or something? I think you might have.
No, I might have. I don't know.
Or maybe we just talked about it.
Stephen Hawking's and others, but no, it's just you read it, and like we've talked about in the case of Nietzsche, a lot of what Hitchens says I think is valuable because one, it gives you an insight into the Church of England and the theology of the Church of England and what he grew up with in England, and he talks about it in the book. And quite honestly, the kind of pantheistic deism that he was raised in, I just looked at it and went, yeah, that's gross. Why would you go to church I don't need to go to church to believe any of that. And that was kind of his point, is like, you're walking around with your Sunday school teacher and she's pointing at flowers and the grass and the sky and saying, God made all this. Isn't he wonderful? Meanwhile, precocious Christopher Hitchens in his head's like, last night on the television, I just watched people in Afghanistan being blown up and riots in the streets of Northern Ireland and this and that and the other thing. So tell me again why God is good. And so he would then ask his teacher, his Sunday school teacher and his teachers at school, why do you keep saying God is good? And why do you say this and say this, but you don't ever address these things? And he was essentially, in his opinion or in his, recalling of it, he was shut down and told those are impious questions.
Huh.
And,
that's funny, because that correlates to the conversation I've been having the last couple of days with you about gatekeepers.
Correct. Exactly.
It's like, there's plenty of stuff in the scriptures themselves, never mind all the, extra biblical evidence of, the way that Christians have behaved, that isn't always that comfortable, right?
Right. And so secondarily, and you'll get this in the speech we're about to read and go through by Hitchens from 2007, is he turned his attention and his vitriol against the earthly manifestations of people worshiping God. So he wasn't a fan of Mother Teresa. Again, big props to him for that one, because I'm not either. Not a fan of Gandhi. Ditto.
Why? Because they used religious ideology for political gain, basically.
And even MLK Jr., he goes after MLK Jr. And
ooh, that's not going to win him a lot of friends.
Golden calf. And his point, though, is this, and we'll get into it, is that after attacking their faith because of their juvenile, inadequate belief in an invisible man who lives in the sky and needs your money, he then turns his attention to the morality of religion. And that's what it comes to in the end, is that, I think he makes this point, and he might make the point in the speech he's made in other places, which is, he'll argue that, people, he was taught, well, you can't be a moral person, you can't be a good person if you don't believe in God. But then he points out that the most immoral people and the most immoral acts that he's ever witnessed have been done in the name of God by religions. And that morally speaking, not even like theologically, but just morally speaking, all of these religions and these religious leaders are immoral. And so I think that's what we'll see. Whereas Peter Hitchens, his brother, just as an aside, he's a convert to Christianity, but he's also extremely political in Great Britain, or at least he was. I lost track of him the last couple of years. But when you read Peter, then Peter is not the kind of theologian that you and I would ping off of, because his theology is extremely political, which again, I think is more of a consequence of being a British citizen and growing up in the Church of England and the relationship of the Church of England with the crown and then with the power structure in England. And I think in this country, it's a little bit more diffuse because we're also much younger as a country and it's more decentralized. And so we don't necessarily immediately recognize how the church is working hand in glove with the state in this country, especially nowadays. Maybe back in the 80s with the moral majority and the religious right, it was a little bit more clear.
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, I don't think, like in the past year, it became much more evident which church bodies were working hand in glove with the state regarding COVID lockdowns and guidelines and those who weren't. And so Christopher goes after it. Peter apologizes for it. And therefore, that's why their debates, I think, are exhausting to try and get through, because they're just meandering. And theologically, I never felt like there was never a payoff theologically.
Isn't that kind of the British kind of debate?
That too, right? I've never really appreciated that form of debate. It's like watching the House of Commons.
Right.
On
How's my
C-SPAN.
mic sounding now? Is it sounding any different to you?
It's still crackly. You're just fainter.
Fainter, but still crackly.
Yeah.
Weird. Okay.
That's what mic is, very crackly, yeah. You are correct, Paul.
There's no good reason for it. I have no idea.
Right.
Sounds good on this end, but
there you go. Now it sounds great.
Really?
Yeah.
That was it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
There we go.
Good.
One, you're louder, and it's clear now. So I don't know what you did, but
I just toggled things around a little bit. Flip some switches.
Push some buttons, flip some switches.
Push some buttons. I was gonna say about.
Pulleys.
No, I think their debate style is less agenda driven. I mean, there is an agenda, but they don't have a goal presumed.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose they're trying to convince each other, but I think probably they don't expect that they're going to get anywhere on
But
that.
when you watch the debates, what happens when they get to a kind of bottleneck in the conversation is they both default to making, like, they both poke at each other
Like
because they're
ad
brothers.
hominem or something?
Well, they do it in such a way that only siblings would know what's really under the surface of the statement.
The inside baseball. Okay.
So they'll make, like Christopher will kind of look at Peter out of the corner of his eye and be like, "You're doing it again." Now, and then Peter immediately like goes off and you're like, "What's
Doing
going on?"
what? Yeah,
And
exactly.
then as you watch the rest of the debate though, and they start getting, it's almost as if at some point you expect one of them to be like, "That's why Mom liked you better." Like, that happens, But if you want to see a comparative debate, watch Jordan Peterson debate Sam Harris, which was, to me, incredibly boring because it was a conversation that went nowhere because both of them sat and argued for a couple hours about definitions.
Well, but you have to do that, don't
But
you?
they couldn't agree on the definitions. So therefore the debate didn't go anywhere because problematically, and they acknowledge this after the fact, because I think, was it Rubin or Weinstein that moderated it? I can't remember exactly. But anyways, they didn't set up the ground rules before the conversation. And therefore,
and definitely, I think Peterson needs that. And I stopped listening. I can't listen to the other guy anymore.
yeah. You mean
And
Harris?
Harris, once he bit, he definitely swallowed the COVID poison.
Correct.
Is that a good way to put it? I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Well, you can either swallow it or inject it. It's your choice.
Yeah. I mean,
Spike protein is a
there's been others that have done this too.
Cytotoxin. There we go.
It's like, it's hard to trust somebody when they stop using their intellect just in one area, right?
Correct.
And you're like, why did you suspend your belief there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
It's like having
Seth,
one room in your house that you never go into, but you don't really have a good reason for why you don't go into that room.
well, and ultimately it was just it's just flat out Trump hatred. He couldn't give Trump credit for anything. And I'm like,
Right.
there's plenty of things you can obviously
Fault him for.
criticize him
Yeah.
for. Yeah,
Yeah.
plenty. Right. But to not give any credit is like, you're definitely blinded. Your hatred has blinded you. Right.
Right.
And then it's hard to listen to somebody because you're like, okay, you're not being reasonable anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So you said it was Peterson and,
Harris. And your
Harris.
Craftsman again. That's so weird. Just goes in and out.
huh? Weird.
So we'll
We'll just-
include a link to Hitchens' speech in the show notes, as always.
It's already
And-
there.
Good. This is from 2007. It's called God is Not Great, an acceptance speech that was delivered on October 14th. October 14th, 2007, 4 years before he died, at the 30th Annual National Convention of the Freedom From Religion Foundation at the Monona Terrace Convention Center in Madison, Wisconsin, of all places.
Have you been to Madison?
I have been to Madison, and
This is like leftist central,
I know it is. I know it is.
next to Portland, and
They used
I
to
don't
have
know where.
great bookstores.
Well, of course.
Madison used to, when I was in college, Madison was famous for two things: great used bookstores and alcohol. That was the only reason to go.
Well, it's Wisconsin. I mean, would you expect any less?
No, actually, I wouldn't.
No. I mean, it's
Beer,
pretty much your
food, crafts. Beer, food, crafts.
beer, food, and crafts.
Everywhere you go, every off ramp, there's a beer, food, and craft shop.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah,
But true.
But God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens. I'll breeze through the beginning of this because he gets into the meat of it down the road a little bit. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, comrades, friends, brothers, and sisters, for coming. Thank you.
Comrades.
All right. Very generous introduction. Thank you for the FFRF Free Thought Calendar.
Thanks for the grab bag, for the goodie bag.
Yeah, right. My birthday is the 13th of April, which is the same birthday as the author of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, Mr. Jefferson. I took my oath at his memorial in Washington, swearing to particularly, I wrote it in, uphold the separation of church and state, as bodied forth in his letter as president to the Baptists of Danbury in Connecticut. Very famous letter, if you're not aware of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They were frightened of persecution. Frightened of persecution from who, by the way? The congregation of Danbury, Connecticut. Anyway, as you well know, who doesn't know that, the reply that he gave said that there should ever be a wall of separation between church and state in this great republic. And I proudly affirmed as much, and I have been going around the South promulgating my new slogan, in which I ask you to join me. Mr. Jefferson, build up that wall.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, right?
That's pretty meta. Good.
I like it. That's from Reagan, by the way, for those of you who are too young to remember. That's Ronald Reagan. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And the letters that Danbury Baptist, it's a separation of church and state. I don't think it's used the word wall, by the way.
I think it does, actually.
Is that the first one that uses the word wall?
I thought it was, to construct a wall.
Maybe it does.
Prevention or a wall.
I'll give Hitchens. Yeah, I'm sure Hitchens is right on that.
I do feel I might give you a brief report on my swing through the areas of piety. I guess
this is
it was
good rhetoric, right?
Right? I know. I
Establish a
love him.
rapport.
This is why I like him. I disagree with him on so many points, but he's just such an engaging speaker. It's like he went on Charlie Rose. There's an interview that he did with Charlie Rose where he goes after the Clintons, and Charlie Rose tries to run interference for the Clintons. And this is after Clinton was president. This is long after it. In the mid 2000s, I think he did this interview. But anyways, he just goes after him and accuses him of everything that we now know is true. And Rose is running interference, and Hitchens just takes Charlie Rose, folds him up in an origami shape, and just throws him away. It's just like, no, you cannot compete with me in matters of wit, rhetoric, or logic. Don't do it. He just made him look foolish. I was in North Carolina. The carcass of Jerry Falwell was found unraptured, slumped on the floor of his mediocre degree mill of an office in Virginia. And I was able to say, though they tried to bleep it on Hannity and Combs, that had Falwell been given an enema, he could have been buried in a matchbox. I am very familiar with that joke. I'm like Captain America and the Avengers. I got that reference. So good are things these days with YouTube and other things my children can do and I cannot, that apparently I was lip read saying that, even though they bleeped it out. So it got said on the air anyway. So let's not say that all the victories are on the wicked side. But I did not expect that by the end of the summer, there would have been a bunch of letters published by the late woman arrogantly calling herself Mother, quote unquote, Mother Teresa. Agnes, do you know how to pronounce her last name, by the way?
Bohayu?
Sure.
I don't know.
Let's go with that. Agnes Bohayu. Apologies for mispronouncing it. It's Macedonian.
But we could Google it here. And we'll see
it. Agnes, elderly virgin of Macedonia, inflicting her hideous doctrines on the wretched of Bengal, saying that she could not believe a word of it either. I did not think she was one of us. If she could not bring herself to believe it, then let's, for heaven's sake, extend the hat of compassion to her ourselves. For those of you who aren't familiar with Mother Teresa and her work with orphans and street people, and also there's a lot there after the fact, like her participation in the state non-involvement in caring for the poor and taking care of orphans, and also, unfortunately, her alleged activity and connection with Ghislaine Maxwell's father.
Oops.
And human trafficking. There's pictures, there's receipts.
Wasn't it after the fact that the writings came out where she just straight up renounced Jesus?
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. So that's not very Christian.
No. They had to invent 3 miracles for her to make her a saint. On top of everything. But she wasn't a good person is basically what I'm saying.
Right.
Which that's essentially what Hitchens is alluding to. Now, one of the things I've learned in this process of debate and engagement with the faithful, and no one yet has said that I've lost one, although I don't want to sound conceited, is that I've learned not to say some things that used to irritate me. I don't say anymore, for example, why do they never come up with any new arguments? Because I heard myself saying that after a debate with a theologian one night in Georgetown. Well, they can't come up with any arguments, can they? They're stuck, if you like, with field arguments. They can say, by torturing themselves into a pretzel shape, quote, all right, come to think of it, it does look as if we've got here as primates after 99.8% of all the other species ever created on Earth became extinct. Mm-hmm. That only shows how clever God was to begin with, unquote. This applies only to those I've debated who accept the theory of evolution by natural selection, and who do understand a little bit of physics. It's not much of an argument, is it? Well, not really if you ignore the scientific method.
Correct. Yep.
And I'm actually saying that on Hitchens' side of things, is that in order to ignore the methodology of the scientific method, one can then make the argument for evolution. If one ignores the fact that you can't actually prove evolution, which is why it's always a theory, because you can't submit it to the methodology of the scientific method, and that was created by Francis Bacon. Go look at it yourself. And go read his book, Novum Organum.
You mean the
which warns
theory of
against
evolution is a dogmatic assertion?
Nowadays it is, yeah.
Yeah. Like it's a
It's a
it helps
religious cult.
Yeah, it helps people understand things that they don't understand. Scientists.
That would then mean that they don't understand it.
Correct. But it helps them understand it. They feel better about it.
They feel better about not understanding what they don't understand.
Yeah, because they have this theory that they can't verify that
That it's incomprehensible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 42, right? It's the theory of everything.
Right. Yeah.
It's like that. It helps, does it?
Right.
Kind of.
That only shows how clever God was to begin with then. So actually, it doesn't really count as an argument at all. It isn't reasoning of any kind. It's sort of reverse engineering. But it is, as is often said of hypocrisy, the compliment that vice pays to virtue. It's a tribute, in a sense, to the work that, had it been done earlier, would have meant that there was no need for superstition in the first place. Again, the theory of evolution is a superstition.
There you
Just
go.
like the
That's what I
Big
meant by a
Bang Theory
dogmatic
is.
assertion. Yeah.
Yeah, it's superstitious. It's a
So,
superstition.
This is one of the problems with Hitchens, and I think it's, but it's also delightful for us, is that he's not quite getting to the point.
Right.
He does that dance where it's very high level, and you're like, so what are you actually talking about?
Right. Well, he obfuscates through rhetoric.
Right, exactly.
Right. Dawkins speaks in circles. He speaks in syllogisms. So he has circular logic. It's a closed system. Whereas Hitchens just rhetoric, wit, cleverness, appealing to that.
Wordsmithy, yeah.
Wordsmith, exactly. But as someone who was brought to believe in God through science and philosophy, and I tell this to people because I belong to a conservative church body, at least on paper it's conservative. So people will accuse me of being, anti-science.
Right.
I know you and I both laugh into our shirts, and I point out to them, I actually came to faith through science, through the argument of Stephen Hawking's In a Brief History of Time, through microbiology and Darwin's Black Box.
Apologetically, right.
Apologetically, exactly. And those authors, like Stephen Hawking, didn't set out to convert people to believe in a higher power. It was just reading his hypotheses about the universe that you're like, well, I got to think about this some more. This is much more elegant and complex than I thought.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that Hawking really does well, right? Is he shows you that it's extraordinarily complex and beautiful, right? And worthy of exploration.
Right.
In the same way that God's word is, I think.
Right.
So there's an analogy there.
I think what we don't comprehend, because like we were talking about before we hit record, people just don't have the time to think about these things or consider them, is elegance in the scientific nomenclature, that the universe is elegant. And elegance is a word used to essentially describe something that couldn't have happened by accident.
Okay.
Something that happens by accident isn't elegant. It's an accident. And it's kind of, you throw stuff at the board and whatever sticks, that's the shape, right? It's like Dadaism.
Right.
The art movement, Dadaism. You kind of just drop a whole bunch of stuff on a piece of paper or on a canvas, and then however it lands, that's that. And it's like, oh, I'm going to throw a whole bunch of mechanical parts up in the air, and when they land, they're going to become a car. Right? That's elegance. And not accident. So when you read A Brief History of Time, for example, then what Hawking is really pointing out is the elegance of the universe, and like with Darwin's Black Box, the same thing, the elegance of the human eyeball, the elegance of just the cardiovascular system within our bodies, that you look at these things and you say to yourself, and this is apart from a very specific defined belief in Jesus or something.
Sure.
It's just, this is far too elegant to just have quote unquote evolved gradually over time.
Well, don't you think it's a paradox? I mean, I was talking to some folks on Saturday and saying that, a universally held belief, it doesn't matter what religious tradition you're in, is entropy, right? Everybody knows from the moment you're born, you're dying, right? And they can look around and everything's, if it's left untended, it falls into chaos and disorder, right? It never falls into like a perfectly ordered, reality. right? And your life is not, you're not moving towards a higher level of existence. You're just just getting old and dying.
Life is a
And-
temporary reversal of the second law of thermodynamics.
Right, exactly. And so you look at it and like, well, then how does the theory of evolution fit within this? Where you're like, well, but you're adapting in a positive way. Well, maybe you are to avoid dying,
I
but
think it's a mad scramble to save ourselves from inevitable doom.
right, which is that's the reality that I think everyone acknowledges.
That's
they
I think
recognize
what
that.
happens though is that these theories prove to be, like Nietzsche said, they prove to be nihilistic or fatalistic in the end, because the more you try and fix something, the more apparent it becomes that this is not fixable, such as mortality.
Right. Well, and this is the thing I've been thinking about progressive ideology, not just politically, but in every aspect of life, and it applies scientifically too, right? To the progress of the human race and how avoiding
Or
death,
lack
like we
thereof.
talked about before. It's a substitute for obviously for death and resurrection, as the scripture gives it. It ends up becoming religious, hopefully
Right.
religious, right? But not with any evidence.
Right.
You're like, well, I mean, life expectancy today isn't really all that different than it's ever been.
Right. It's
I mean, you
probably
do have that-
lower now that we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. I was talking with some people.
Yeah.
It's actually probably lower now because of the introduction into society of food and drink and an environment that is like literally custom tailored to debilitate and destroy you.
You mean like plastic nanoparticles? Okay.
Yeah, like that the human being, if you look at, let's say, 8,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, what was there that could kill you? How many viruses, how many kinds of bacteria, germs, and so forth could literally kill you, right? And there's something to tribalism and fear of the stranger, because that's fear of contagion. You know, the person in the valley over there, they've had this sickness before, but it's never been in our valley, and they come
What
over
was
here and give
the Mel Gibson movie when it was in
Apocalypto?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, which that's the conclusion of it. Sorry to give
Right.
it away if you haven't seen it, but
Spoilers, Spanish. The conquistas land. But
Right.
the point is then that I think anyways, if you look at ancient tribal societies, old tribal societies, the reasons that people lived longer is because, one, their basic needs were simpler. And that's not to say that our basic needs today aren't as simple. We've complicated everything.
but
Their
they also
basic
stayed
needs
in
were-
one place, right?
They stayed in one place. They relied on family. They relied on clan. Everybody had clearly defined responsibilities within the clan and the tribe. You kept the outsiders away, so you weren't you didn't have the contagion. The demons didn't come. The witch didn't come and cast evil spirits at you.
Right.
But also then you didn't go to the store and buy not food to put in your body and not drinks to put in your body, and you didn't breathe brake dust or all the other things that are floating around in the air, like you said, all the plastics
Or in
that
the
are
water,
air,
yeah.
or in the water. You weren't being vaccinated with whatever gets injected into your body with vaccines, because those diseases didn't exist. That's my point. Whether you're pro or anti-vax, the diseases didn't exist.
But that's the question.
Industrialized
You're not
society-
allowed to ask that. You're not allowed,
I
or
know.
to assert that, especially.
Right, but it's like if you look at the Industrial Revolution and then post-Industrial Revolution society and the exponential increase in disease, allergies, fetal death, miscarriages, pandemics, mass extinction events, before it was usually human. It was Genghis Khan coming over the hill.
Yeah.
And then you had the Black Death, but those were in cities.
Did you hear about in that episode from, was it last Saturday on the Weinstein show, Dark Horse, where he was describing anecdotally again, but the miscarriages that these
Yes.
women are having that have been
Yes.
vaccinated, and
Yeah,
like the
where their
baby's head
brains
was
are almost
cleaved
like-
in two
It was cleaved in half. Yep.
and just covered in blood because it's
Yeah.
obviously it's affecting the blood, as we know from the heart and whatever.
Right.
But the comment that really struck me was, the doctor remarked that he had never seen a miscarriage like that before.
Correct.
Like,
Anecdotally.
oh, so we're dealing with something that we haven't dealt with before.
Correct. And that's all I'm saying is, like I said, with the Black Death, it took root in the cities and it found its way into, I don't want people to like, oh, Riley's nuts here. No,
Well, that's true though.
It is true. It took
Sorry.
off in the cities and then it spread to the rural areas.
Yeah.
But had the rural areas protected themselves, and of course, we found out after the fact, like why certain people were immune and certain people weren't. But like the bubonic plague swept through Europe, but it was primarily because of human activities,
Rats.
like Yeah, like rats, and you have open sewers and you dump your garbage out the window, it attracts rats and flies, and I'm just saying though, you live in like a desert or a semi-arid climate in 4000 BC.
It's going to be a scorpion bite instead.
Right, it's going to be a scorpion or a snake bite. It's going to be the enemy coming over the hill. But by and large, you're immune. Like the ecosystem that you live in your clan and your tribe has a built-in immune system to it, because everyone's going to get the same sicknesses and then be inoculated to those through herd immunity, if you believe in such things.
There's no such thing. Sorry.
Versus nowadays, especially with mass transit, it's impossible to stop that. And like I said, I think what has happened, of course, is that in the name of progress, especially since the Industrial Revolution, we are the authors of our own destruction. And
but that is the biblical narrative, isn't it?
Kind of is.
If you read
and so
it
we were like, well, we'll fix this over here because this is killing us. And it's like, have you gone to a store lately? Like, the store is killing you. Your groceries are killing you.
Insert here, the old joke about Twinkies, right?
Well, Twinkies, yeah, just all the soy-based products, and we know what it does to testosterone levels and so forth and so on.
Phytoestrogens.
Right. We know what it does now. It's like research has proven that fluoride makes you dumber. But it's, fluoride's essentially ubiquitous at this point. Like, you can't not ingest fluoride.
I just love that the conspiracy theorist guy, what is it, General Ripper, right? From Dr. Strangelove, they're
he was right.
Bodily fluids, our precious
Ripper
bodily
was
fluids.
Right.
And he was right.
Yeah.
And Kubrick was just messing around, but
was he though?
Or did he know?
Or was he being satirical?
Was he being subversive? Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Steve, our friend Steve, friend of the show, congregation member, martial artist, he had to fly to Atlanta, and I made a joke to him because he said there's vaccination stations in the airport everywhere. And I said, yeah, the branch Covidians have taken over for the Hare Krishnas at airports now.
I love the Hare Krishnas.
And he looked it up. He's like, I had to look it up, but you're absolutely right. He just texted me. He's like, they're everywhere. They're like Hare Krishnas.
What happened to them? Yeah, where'd they go?
Well, they're not allowed to be in airports anymore.
Oh, is that what happened?
Yeah, well, that, and I think they just kind of ran their course. They're still around. I just don't think they're, you can't hang out at airports like you used to be able to. And
I had a coworker in high school. She decided to become a Hare Krishna.
Right.
And she went all in. She shaved her head, the whole deal.
Good for her. If you're going to commit, go all the way.
Yeah, if it works for you, I guess.
I'm
a practical guy.
There you go. Oh, here we go. So he continues. Same with Big Bang, after all. It's an awesome cosmic event involving a great deal of heat and a great deal of light. In fact, Dinesh D'Souza, one of my best antagonists, a really believing, serious Catholic, does say in his new book, What's So Great About Christianity? A book that needs a question mark in its title, but doesn't have one.
That's so good.
That come to think of it, Genesis, instead of negating the Big Bang, and this is kind of D'Souza's point that he's making, instead of negating the Big Bang, predicts it. Because we used to laugh and say, how could God create light and only then the sun and moon and stars? Well, Big Bang answers that. So you see, it was always there all along. Only we were too dumb to see it. Now, I agree with Dinesh that that's a nice try, but that's as generous as I'm prepared to be.
Man, I cannot listen to Dinesh.
I'm going to say something super controversial.
I know he's popular,
but I hope it's helpful. Genesis isn't a science textbook.
What? Oh,
Genesis chapter 1 and 2 is not a science textbook, so stop treating it that way. And you know who I'm targeting with his museum.
I don't know. I mean, building your own ark, that's pretty awesome. Because you're ready to go then, I suppose. Except God didn't promise another flood, so...
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, did you not read into the next chapter? Spoiler alert.
You needed to actually align it with asbestos for the fire and brimstone.
100%, exactly. It's just, again, as a person, and I have friends who are far smarter than I am and far more qualified, who I have talked to with this in the hard sciences, who I deeply appreciate. And I've asked them the question, as a physicist, as an astrophysicist, as a chemist, so forth, even as a marine biologist. I'm like, when you read the book of Genesis, and these are Christians, by the way, when you read the book of Genesis, chapters 1 and 2, do you ever say to yourself, as a scientist, this is useful to me as a scientist? No, of course not. No more than if I picked up A Brief History of Time and read that from the lector, from the lectern on Sunday mornings, my congregation would walk away saying to themselves, well, that was good. That pointed me to Jesus.
Well, how often when science is imported then too, like actual practical science, so things that we've observed or
Yes.
whatever now, and then we try to import it into the scriptures. I think the famous one is the Red Sea, right? And they say, well, or no, it's the Nile turning to blood, and they're like, well, it's red algae at that time of year or something.
Yeah.
You're like, is that really helpful? I mean, to the story now, whether you think it actually turned to blood or if it was something
Right.
metaphorical or whatever, we don't have to argue about that now.
Yeah.
But you're kind of destroying the narrative.
Right.
You're destroying the point of the story. Same thing with the creation story, right? If you're trying
Right.
to explain like a day is 1,000 years and you get in all this kind of complicated,
Yes. Right.
hoop jumping, you're like, I think God made the heavens and the earth and everything in, and he set it in order. I think that's kind of the point. And he set your life in order too.
And
With
the
days
reason
and
I bring
weeks
it up
and
too
suns and
is
moons
that
and all that. Yeah.
my opinion is that the debate would benefit from both sides acknowledging they're superstitious, first of all,
Okay. Yeah.
and owning that, like, as a Christian, I'm superstitious in the classical sense of the word. I actually believe, for example, when there's bread and wine on the altar and I say some words, that the body and blood of Jesus are present under the bread and wine.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's possible. It's a mystery to me, but in faith, I accept it. And someone can accuse me of being superstitious. Look up the definition of superstition, not the, more modern, like, oh, you're superstitious. Ooh, you believe in fairies or the earth is flat or dinosaurs live in Antarctica or something like that. No, I mean,
Or a guy that's blind wearing sunglasses.
why would you do that?
Dun, 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 dun,
Why
dun,
would you do
dun,
that to
dun,
me?
dun.
What?
Now it's in your head. And superstitious.
Stop it.
Okay. All right.
You know, there's
Fair
a
enough.
conspiracy theory that Stevie Wonder isn't blind.
Of course there is.
That's what I thought you were referring to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, there's videos on YouTube you can watch where they're like, see, look, there, right there. He looked. And you're like, really? That's what you're gonna plant your flag on Stevie Wonder not being blind? Like,
it makes sense.
Even if it
makes
were
sense.
true, is that what you're gonna plant your flag on that? But no, it's funny. What was I gonna say? Oh, I said this in the sermon yesterday. Science done correctly only furnishes us with the means by which we live, never with the spiritual ends for which we live.
Okay.
And as long, and I actually stole that from Martin Luther King Jr. in a famous sermon that he said or preached. But when science is done correctly according to its methodology, it furnishes us with a means by which we live. For example, I had bad eyesight beginning when I was about 12 or 13 years old. At least that's when they caught it. And So I had contacts and glasses my whole life. And then 6 years ago or so, I had LASIK surgery. Corrected both my eyes. So now I have 20/10 vision. Great benefit of science, because had I lived 50 years ago, that's not an option. It's not on the table. It's not even discussed. It's science fiction.
Right.
But I just went in and in 30 seconds, both my eyes were fixed. No more glasses, no more contacts. Awesome. I'm good to go. I'm extremely pro-science for that reason, because it provides me with a means by which I live.
Yeah. Well,
I
like when
can
I see
see
the
better.
when I see the car coming down and I hear it coming and I see it and I don't
Yeah.
go walking in front of it, I'm thankful,
Correct.
for the skill of observation that the Lord's given me. Right.
Exactly. But I'm just saying, scientifically, observing the physical universe, asking why do people lose their eyesight, and then asking, is there a way to fix a person's eyesight? That's the purpose of science, to help us understand the truth about our bodies, our world, and the universe. But recognizing within that what we're striving for is a means by which we live. And as you noted, we're constantly striving to live by better means.
I think it's even worse than that, actually, to live in a way that we aren't. So,
Well, if you look at transhumanism and what's going on
Right.
with predictive AI and stuff like that and quantum computing, that's where we're at.
right,
100%.
to become something other than who we are, rather than becoming more of who we are. if you
Right,
like.
right.
Yeah.
And yet what science, real science, not religious scientism or the science as it's called, what it can provide us with is a reason for which we live, because science isn't a living thing. It's not a living organism. It's not a being.
It doesn't
And
have a
therefore-
goal.
It doesn't have a goal. Exactly. It's actually life denying, according to Nietzsche, when it's treated as a god.
Right.
Because in the end, it can tell us what the means by which we can extend our life, possibly, but it can't then give us a reason for living life.
Yeah.
other than just the simple purpose of living longer. Like that becomes the goal in and of itself. It's an end in and of itself. Why do you want to live longer? Because I can. Okay, but what are you doing it for?
But that's what it's the same goal as any of the world religions is immortality.
Right, because like I said, the option is nihilism or fatalism.
No. But our confession, of course, is that we're already immortal, by virtue of our baptism.
Right.
And yet we're living in this mortal flesh.
Correct. And the move in science, especially starting in the 80s, was the ghost in the machine. How can we get our conscience out of our bodies into technology, into machinery, so that because the assumption is the Cartesian, Descartes, I think, therefore I am.
Right.
That my consciousness is my thinking. Versus, nowadays...
So then this singularity, right? When the machine takes on consciousness.
Correct. Whereas now, of course, the new theory is that our consciousness is located in our gut-brain biome, which completely ruins that.
Yeah, there's as many nerve endings in your gut as there are in your brain.
Correct.
I wonder how much Hollywood isn't always in control of the narrative, because sometimes scripts get out. Mm-hmm. We've talked about this, I think, privately, but sometimes scripts get out that are actually pretty critical of the whole transhumanist agenda. Like Gattaca is a good example of that.
Correct.
Another one was the Johnny Depp movie where he does get transplanted into the machine, but then he becomes not benevolent but malevolent.
Oh yeah, that was a really bad movie.
It was a terrible movie.
What was that called? Transference? No.
Something like that.
Something
His consciousness gets transferred into the machine, and then he becomes a terrible person.
Mm-hmm.
Because
I liked it better when it was Tron.
Well, no, Tron kind of has that too. Yeah, it has a similar theme.
Yeah.
There's been other examples. There's where the machine takes on consciousness. You had the Kubrick movie that got taken over by Spielberg.
Like Maximum Overdrive by Stephen King.
AI, Maximum Overdrive, yeah.
Where it takes over the machines, the trucks and stuff.
Of course, Terminator.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Now that Skynet is actually up and running, by the way, for those of you listening who don't know, Skynet is now active. Thank you, Amazon.
I'd say call my Wi-Fi network Skynet, just to confuse people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know it's an old
go
joke,
check out Amazon Sidewalk if you haven't opted out already.
That's right.
You are participating in Skynet.
Right, and considering it's AI controlled,
which is why I have an
brilliant.
Alexa now. I bought it from my coach. I use it at the gym in my church basement, which is where it stays because I won't allow it in my house.
Well, you think they're going to send the killer drones after you if it's in your house?
Why add to it? Why paint an even bigger target on my back? I don't need that.
They won't be killer drones. It'll be those little nanobots.
That's true, which is being injected into people already. So that's a whole other conversation.
Just flip the switch, man.
Just flip it. Just flip the switch. So
back to optimism.
What we have to do is grasp something right off and stop being the least bit apologetic about it ourselves. It is often conceded that though religion may be metaphysically false and not even really metaphorically true, that its figures are those of legend and of myth, and its miracles are fairy tales for scared children, and all completely impossible to deny or refute. But nonetheless, it has an ethical basis. These fairy tales at least teach children how to behave well. There it is.
Isn't that Jordan Peterson?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Although I think he wouldn't say that they're metaphysically false, because if they teach you to behave well, then they're metaphysically true.
I think Jordan P. would argue that metaphysically, yes, they're objectively true. And there has to be a reason they're objectively true, which is why they're repeatable across cultures and time. Mm-hmm. And Christopher would not acknowledge
Hence,
that.
metaphysically. Yeah.
Correct. Okay. The beginning of the argument must be that we say this is not so. We're not conceding this to the faithful. And here's where he goes. So he dismisses belief in God. It's just superstitious, fairy tale, indefensible.
That's a starting point.
That's a starting point, which, by the way, I agree with.
It's not a bad starting point.
Hope that is seen is not hope.
Sure.
Okay. And, of course, this is where Christians, I also believe, have to admit, along with the atheists, that we have superstitions. We believe in superstitions. I believe that serpents once talked and communicated with people.
I'm
I believe
I'm
a
not
donkey was
content,
possessed by the word of God and preached the gospel to a king.
right? And I'm not content with the way that's been refuted by some Christians. I'm trying to
Correct.
think who this was. Oh, Karl Barth was the example, the Reformed Karl Barth,
Exactly. Yep.
where he said, well, it doesn't matter that the serpent spoke, it's what the serpent said. And you're
Yes.
like, so it's the content of the serpent's message that matters, not whether or not it was actually a serpent speaking.
Exactly.
And like,
Yes.
don't you actually destroy, again, the narrative and say, well, you're functionally saying the narrative isn't true then.
Correct.
The words are true, but not the
Yes.
actual story.
Right. Late medieval piety taught that you should live as if all of your sin is forgiven. The key words there are as if. Likewise, read the Bible as if it's true. There's a problem with that, isn't there? Because
Yeah,
like
qualitatively,
you said,
it's to
right.
what
Like
level
we said
is it
earlier,
then?
that's
Yeah.
like saying there's a room in my house that I never go into. I don't really have a reason for it. I just don't like that room.
The room's there, I think.
I don't like the paint in the room. I don't like the color of the paint. I don't like the ventilation. I don't like the size of the room. Wrong dimension. So I just don't go in there.
That's my office. Okay.
That too. Yeah, definitely my office. Melody says Metropolis, circa 1927. Fritz Lang, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Way ahead of the curve on that one. But
Go
that's
back and look what was happening in Germany in 1927. And
I was
you'll
going to say.
why.
Well, and I made the argument. I haven't really found many people to back me up on this, so I don't know if it's true, but or if it works out. But the agenda that we're seeing now at play
Right.
is from the teens.
Correct.
So the social planners then, they didn't get away
Very
with
much.
it because World War II kind of hijacked it, and then we had other kinds of revolutions that had to happen, to prepare us for today.
Right.
But obviously,
Right.
technological revolution was the big one. But it's based that when you read like the eugenicists from the teens, you're like, wait a minute, these people sound like the people today. Oh,
Right.
you mean the same philosophy has actually held on since then, and that's why you see it in Metropolis. Like,
Well,
no,
you
it's the
read
same.
those, I can't remember who it was, but in 1938, that group of scientists predicted that 100 years from then, they would have the technology to engage in this one world government, new world order kind of stuff. And they were just talking about like a one world government and everybody being connected by technology simultaneously. So there weren't, because their idea was like, well, one, no more war because we're all connected.
Right.
And once we connect to each other and get to know each other, then we won't kill each other. Oh, the optimism.
And they were going to use maritime law for this, if I remember.
Yes,
right.
that's right. That's where it's at. That's where that came from. The maritime law stuff. Exactly. That
Very
came out of that
weird,
too.
hard to get your head around, but yeah.
It is, but the point being then in the 20s and 30s, there were a lot of smart people who recognized we've got a plan that's doable, but we lack the technological means to distribute it in a broad population of people. So a lot was written and a lot was planned back in the 20s and 30s, but it took 100 years for the technology to catch up to the plan.
Hence the capitalist industrial revolutions. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, I got it.
And so you see people like Fritz Lang then in the 20s in Berlin, for example, which resembles a lot of modern American cities.
Bohemian, yes.
That's a very polite way of saying it. Yes. And then these people are stepping back and they're making art that reflects their hope or their fear of where this is going to lead in the future. This
That's
kind
an
of
interesting.
dystopian
That's an
future.
interesting thought. That the utopia dystopia
Because
kind of
remember in
thing.
Metropolis, there's two societies.
right.
There's the elites that live above the city, the streets, and then the Morlocks, essentially, the plebes who live down on the city, on the streets, and never the twain shall meet.
Just like in Brazil, or just
Exactly.
keep going.
Yeah. Fifth Element, everything. Yeah. So you have a two-tiered society, and Elysium with Matt Damon in our bad movie,
yeah, that
but
one
same
too.
basic thing. Or even Altered Carbon we've talked about before with the cloud cities in Altered Carbon
And Edge of Tomorrow. I mean, you just keep going
over
through
and
the
over
list.
again. Exactly.
Yeah.
Is that there is this comprehension that
City of Men.
City of Men.
It's like, just keep going.
There's a widespread comprehension that the only way that we're going to avoid the future, the dystopian future, is to basically pick and choose who deserves to thrive, and then those who we're going to use to thrive as a consequence. We're going to exploit these people in order that we can thrive.
So you can't have a utopia without a dystopia.
Correct. Right. Which we see right now.
Yeah, running in parallel. Okay.
Yeah. So I think it's just that both sides need to be a little bit more honest about their motive and their intent, and both need to be humble enough, or at least kind enough and charitable enough to acknowledge, yeah, there's stuff on both sides here that we could consider theory or superstition that has no basis in fact. And then I don't even like that term, fact, because again, we're
It's
one side is,
fungible, right?
yeah, we're making an argument from observable reality. Like we've repeated this methodology and this is what we've observed to be true. Now, tomorrow it might be different because we have new data, but as far as today goes, this is a fact. But it's not a fact for all time and space. It's just a fact right now.
Well, I'd prefer the word evidence.
Yeah, that's
You present the evidence, but the evidence doesn't necessarily give you motive. It doesn't
Correct.
tell you, so intent would be another way to say
Correct.
that.
Right.
It certainly doesn't tell you conclusion.
Correct.
It just tells you what is now.
Yes.
That's about all it can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So the beginning of the argument must be that we say this is not so. We're not conceding this to the faithful. Is it moral, for example, to tell children, to tell anybody that their sins can be forgiven? Then, because of the human sacrifice in which they had no say, which if they had had any children say they would want it stopped, would not want to see it happen. Because of the hideous torture and death of someone 2,000 years ago, their personal responsibility is dissolved. All they need to do is to recognize the beauty of this human sacrifice, throw their sins on the scapegoat, and be forgiven.
Does he understand Christianity or what?
Yep. That is a positively immoral logic. I could, if I wanted to, offer to pay your debts. I'm not going to, but I could. If I liked you enough, I could do that. I could, if I really, really liked you enough, I suppose. There is no system that allows it, but I could. I could offer to serve your term in prison for you, if I knew you enough and believed in you. We know of cases in which Charles Dickens's Tale of Two Cities is the most luminous, where someone will even take someone else's place on the scaffold. They'll do their suffering for them. They'll pay their debts. But they can't take away their responsibility. They can't say their sins never occurred. It would be immoral to try. It reminds me of The Prestige by Christopher Nolan.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Spoiler alert if you haven't watched The Prestige. 3, 2, 1. Christian Bale is a twin. And they're in competition with Hugh Jackman's character, but no one knows that there's twins. Because Christian Bale, they have a deal worked out, right? Where one twin is out half the time, the other twin is out the other half of the time, depending on what's going on. And so in the movie, the one twin sacrifices himself so that the other twin can come back from the dead and become a world famous magician.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then the whole second and third act of the movie is Hugh Jackman trying to figure out how Christian Bale's character came back from the dead when he saw him hung from the gallows.
Yes.
It's the same basic thing of you'd have to love someone so much unconditionally that you can say, I will take your debt upon myself. I'll take your crime upon myself and stand in your place.
I mean,
I
think you could talk about this on even just a simpler level with regards to the Levitical year of Jubilee, right? The 7-year law or the 50-year law. Was it 49
Right.
and 50 on the 50 year? Debts are forgiven. And, I've thought about this and said, well, how beautiful, right? In kind of a utopian kind of way, communistic, maybe even, to just have, your student loans forgiven, after you've done the time, so to speak.
Right.
Which, of course, is the system we're actually under if you're in a public
But
service.
I was promised last year
But I was promised.
that in September.
Right. But here's my point, is to say, how about the people who you owe the debt to? How do they feel about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the year of Jubilee is a fundamentally unjust law. Because it's not a law, actually. It's actually grace.
Yeah.
It's grace, and it's demanded by God. So I guess in that regards, it's lawful. But but he's demanding there be, and same thing with all the Levitical sacrifices, all of these lives given for you. And you look at that and you're like, it's all scandalous, really, in the end.
But here's the problem with your argument from the other side of the street.
Okay, all right.
That's all stuff that happened thousands of years ago to a bunch of people who actually thought that if they sneezed, a devil would go into them, or if they walked out in the desert at night. And they're a bunch of savages. They're pre-modern. They don't understand the universe.
Oh, I see where you're going. Okay.
That's the argument, though. That's the argument, is that they're a bunch of pre-modern savages, and they looked up at the sky and thought that that the stars were gods. And if they knew what we knew, they wouldn't have written that stuff.
Yeah, like Lewis says, that's chronological snobbery.
Yes, it is.
I mean, they named the constellations. They understood their motion. No.
They built things like the Acropolis.
Yeah, or the ziggurats. Pick your
Ziggurats,
civilization.
things
Yeah.
that we still can't explain architecturally with the technology they
Oh,
have.
you mean like the pyramids? Yeah, right.
Like that rock with the laser cut
You know that I sent you,
right
right?
through the middle. Yeah.
Ancient aliens.
So much of that stuff, or in
Easy.
Peru, the rocks that are thousands of pounds, but you can't put a piece of paper between them because they're fitted so perfectly.
Did we talk about the Easter Island heads? Did we talk about that? How they're not just heads?
I don't know. Are you talking about the cartoon, or are you talking about it for real?
No, the actual ones on Easter Island.
Yeah.
That actually they carve not just the heads; it's their whole bodies.
Yeah.
But there's so much sediment from the sea
Yeah.
that it's buried. They
Yeah.
buried the rest of the bodies because
Yeah.
they excavated a few, and they're like, what?
Yeah.
Do you know that there's also another set of heads that we don't get to usually see that are on the
Are you talking
island?
about the Olmec heads, or are you talking about Easter Island?
No, they're like Maraki, or what's the name of the island? I can't remember the actual name. We call it Easter Island. But they have these little ones that they do that are like,
Oh yeah, I've seen those before. Yeah, they're all over the place.
yeah, and they represent death, I think, if I
Yeah.
remember right. So
Okay.
like
So they're like
civilization, and then
headstones?
civilization are the big heads, right? And then there's the little ones that are like, this is what's going to end up. So they ended up, most of the people on the island ended up dying, of course.
Correct.
Speaking of entropy,
Yeah.
no, why did I bring that up? Oh yeah, because people think, wow, it's incredible. How did they carve these heads? And they're all uniform and they're placed in some kind of geometric way. And they're like,
Right.
well, actually, they're even more than heads. They're actually whole bodies. And
What else
large
do they
chunk of-
have to do?
Right, and underneath the ground, actually, they're even though they're all very similar, head up.
Yeah.
Actually, underneath, they're different vocations they represented.
Yeah.
They have different
100%.
tools and things in their hands. And,
Right.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. What
'Cause
else
they
did
had
they gonna
time.
do?
And it was also a tradition that was passed from father to son and so on down the road.
Right, but my point is, I mean, this is an ancient civilization,
Correct.
and yet they're showing skill. Well, even just attention to and persistence in doing something. That
Ingenuity, creativity. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we can't even we can barely like create anything because we
Right.
get impatient and move on.
So Hitchens' point at this juncture is that for Jesus to die for the sins of the whole world is immoral because it takes away people's responsibility for their own sin, basically.
Yeah, and he's not wrong, is he?
No. They can't say their sins never occurred because it would be immoral to try. It's like we said last week. It's not that he dies for our sins, but that he also dies because of our sin.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we kill him.
The very centerpiece of the main religion of these United States is something that is positively wicked. It's insulting for us to be made to argue that we might be less ethical or moral because we don't believe. It's not enough for us to say, hey, you can be a good person and be an atheist. Somebody at the convention of AAI the other day in Washington was quoted on television just before I was interviewed saying, well, we're good people. We're just not God people. No, nice try. Get off the apologetic, get off the defense. You can't be a good person and a God person. Let me repeat that. You cannot be a good person and a God person. You cannot be. Religion is the inculcation by coercion, not just of irrationality, but of immorality.
This is just one assertion after another. It's hard to
It is.
respond
He's
to.
stealing a lot from Nietzsche and Feuerbach and other famous atheists at this point. He's just, this doesn't come off sounding arrogant, but he's dumbing it down.
I think so.
He's taking Nietzsche and Feuerbach and extremely
Popularizing it? Is that fair to
Yeah.
say it? Yeah.
Yes, making it more palatable for popular consumption.
Accessible. Sure.
Accessible. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So, what
You
is
can't
moral?
be a good person and a God person.
Correct.
So he
And he's
has
gonna
to
get to
answer
why.
what is moral. Yeah. Okay.
What is moral about vicarious redemption? The horrible doctrine that I've just mentioned. What is moral about the mutilation of the genitals of children in the name of God?
That's a hard turn. Okay.
What is moral about that? The genital mutilation community is entirely theocratic. It should accept responsibility for what it advocates and not say it's teaching morality. What about the Muslim injunction that anyone wishing to change their religion to become an apostate must be killed? Is it moral teaching to say that people who have second thoughts about faith must suffer the death penalty? I hardly think so. Is it moral for Orthodox Jews to greet every lovely day with thanking their Maker for not making them a woman or a Gentile, a goy? Is it moral for the women to have to say, we thank God for making us the way we are? Actually, that's not in the least immoral, but there's something somewhat fatuous about it. It's a form of sadomasochism, which, despite some of its advocates, I don't think is good for you in the long run. Nice hat tip to second wave feminism there.
Right. Oh, and I said that it was a left turn, but I don't think it is. I think he's connecting, and maybe even rightly so. He's connecting genital mutilation. We just say circumcision, right? Circumcision to Christ's vicarious satisfaction.
Yeah. Well, if you think of the Abrahamic
So a little bit of
covenant,
flesh versus all the flesh, basically.
Yeah.
Sacrifice. Okay.
Yeah. Right. You are told to begin with that you are a worm, a sinful, guilty, shrunken, miserable creature. The Quran says that we are made of the clot of blood. The Bible says dust. The Jews say, thank God at least you're not goy. You begin with this abject masochism. You're told that you are responsible for sins that were committed before you were born, that you couldn't have influenced, that your only chance is to take part in a barbaric ritual of torture and death if you are to be free of this inherited burden. You know, like reparations in intersectional politics.
Mm-hmm. You know, he would be a
Critical
great
race
voice
theory.
responding to what we have right now.
He was actually before he died already.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe holding back, actually.
He literally
some of
was
it.
apocalyptic. He's like, here's what's coming and here's why it's complete BS.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the danger of this. So here we go. You're told that you're responsible for sins that were committed before you were born, that you could not have influenced, that your only chance is to take part in a barbaric ritual of torture and death if you are to be free of this inherited burden. This is almost worse than race theory.
Uh-oh, there it is.
Yep. But just because no one could be that abject for so long or forever, there is a compensation offer. Well, the universe is designed with you in mind, and God has a plan for you. So, from being a groveling worm, a clump of blood clot or dust, you can go straight to the most errant self-centeredness. Quote, well, there's a divine scheme, and it has me in mind. Unquote. This is not right. This is bound to lead to bad behavior, physically, socially, psychically, physically, and socially. And it always has, and it always will.
Always.
This is bound to lead to bad behavior, psychically, physically, and socially. Always has, always will.
So he's saying this, that God oriented all things for your salvation makes you selfish.
It leads to the degradation of society because it makes you, one, not responsible for your sin because Jesus, but simultaneously makes you responsible for the consequence.
Right, but it's all you, and this. I mean, we've
Correct.
talked about this before, and that we think one of the deficits, I would say, of at least in our tradition of the church, is the de-emphasis or even just lack of emphasis at all on the third article of the creed.
Correct.
Right, and the communion of saints. You know, the the giving of faith.
Correct.
The reception of gifts. You know, the love for one another that comes from that. I mean,
Right.
yeah. Which is a fair criticism because we are self-centered. But we would say that the selfishness is actually original to us,
Correct.
and that you know, if the Spirit does the job He's promised to do, it actually takes us out of that.
Right.
rather
Well,
than
and I would
drives
say
us
it this
further
way,
in.
right, is what I do is I define sin in modern idiom of selfishness. To be
Right.
curved in on oneself in modern colloquial language is to be selfish, self-centered.
There can be a corporate selfism, I suppose,
And
as
a
well,
corporate
but-
selfishness, of course.
Yeah.
And if Hitchens stopped using the word sin and replaced it with the word selfishness, would that have changed the trajectory of what he's saying? A little bit, probably not much, but at least enough to acknowledge, well, what I'm really talking about is an inherited selfishness, self-centeredness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I also inherit with that the fruit of that selfishness by my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, going all the way back. Because I am going to continue to perpetuate selfishness, both individually, but also corporately.
Right, and he's talking about a moral selfishness.
Exactly. I was just talking with Steve about this in relation to, changing career paths, vocations, relationship goals, the 5 to 7 year, itch, that kind of stuff is what I see people doing incorrectly, in my opinion, is looking at life choices in a binary way. It's either good or bad. versus no, everything you do in life is selfish. The question is just, are you going to use this selfish decision to benefit others or only yourself?
Right. Right.
And so I don't want to change jobs. Why? Because my job sucks and I hate it and I'm miserable. Okay, so you're doing it for purely selfish reasons. How is this going to benefit your family?
Yeah.
And therefore, yes, I'm doing it selfishly, but I'm also doing it for the benefit of others.
A little bit less personally selfish, more selfish for my family, I guess.
Either way, but you're still selfish.
Yeah.
And rather than run away from that and pretend that you're not doing this for selfish reasons, that you're altruistic through and through, you simply take ownership of the fact that, yeah, everything I do is selfish. It's self-centered because there's nobody in the universe that I care about more than me.
Right.
And so to Hitchens' point, what theology does, what religion does, is it feeds what we call the ego. It feeds that selfishness, that self-centeredness by saying, you are so important that God decided before he created the universe that he was going to make you his child.
Little snowflake.
Yes, and you were going to live with him forever. And people that aren't down with the program, you don't have to worry about them. They won't be at the wedding banquet because they'll be burning in hell forever. But God loves you.
Here's a question, though. I've thought about this in regards to like our vocation, pastors. I mean, it could apply to any kind of church work, right? Is that we say that that we've been placed here by the Holy Spirit, right?
Correct.
But not or immediately, but through mediation, right? Well,
Correct.
How does he mediate that? How does he, basically guide you to make a decision? I'm like, all the selfish ways, right?
Right.
Are they going to pay better? Is my family going to be more comfortable?
Right.
Is it out in the country and rather than in the city? I mean, all those, even if you say, well, what's the work they're doing, right? And is that exciting or interesting to me? Well,
Yeah.
you're selfish then.
Exactly.
I was like, how else are you supposed to make that decision without it just being a personal decision, right? And let the Spirit do his work either way, right?
That's right.
Stay or go, make up your mind and go with it, right?
Right.
That's all you can do.
Yeah.
Right. But what I'm questioning here is what does he mean by moral? Because how do you define the morality of that decision? It's like, well, which benefits the most number of people? Well, is that actually what makes something moral or not? I'm not sure.
This is going all the way back to when I first encountered this type of writing. Is my question to your point was, you're appealing to morality as if it's an objective reality.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there you go.
But what objective reality exists outside of yourself and me that you and I can come to the same basic conclusion that it's bad to kill somebody, but good to help somebody not die?
Right. Right.
Is that a cultural construction? And if so, why is it transcultural? It transcends time and societies. There's not a society on earth that has ever said that killing your own is bad. Now, killing other people, they've said that's good, but and we do that all the time. But as far as, again, clan and village, you don't kill your own. That's immoral. So when you appeal to morality and you argue that there's no objective reality, and I'm not saying he is, I'm just following my own logic here because this is the current argument. There is no objective reality. There's only subjective reality and the yes or no of my personal tastes.
Yeah.
Then there is no such thing as morality other than the will to power. I'm stronger than you and I'm a threat to you. So you're going to do what I tell you. Because if you don't, I'm going to crush you. That's the power of the mob.
But I think Hitchens was a little bit more optimistic than that. That he had this concept of like what would be, to be most human, right? To be the best civilization. I don't know where he got it from. I don't know if he even could acknowledge where it came from.
Maybe Nietzsche.
Right, but I mean, is it something in common? Is there an agreed upon morality? That's transcultural. We would say
once you get past like 100 people, no.
Not really, no. Because, I mean, Mao would say something is completely moral that we look at and say that was abhorrent.
Correct.
Well, why is that? Well, we're coming from different starting points, different ending points. I think it's probably more often the case.
Right. That's why I think most people nowadays think that our society is coming apart at the seams because you have so many competing versions of morality, arguments for morality.
Okay. All right.
Fair
enough.
Like, It's like up here in Minneapolis, there's another riot, and the T-Mobile store got broken into, and shoe store and all this stuff. And then they stopped it. Independent journalist was interviewing one of the looters, and like, why are you looting? Because one of our brothers got shot by the police and killed. What was his name? Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's like, wait, there's no morality to it. The morality is, we know that we're not going to be prosecuted, therefore, and like you and I have said ad nauseum, the only power that the law has is the threat of violence.
Right,
And
and
now
if you're
it's
not
being
gonna,
proven.
yeah, just like with parents, if you don't follow through, then kids are gonna run all over you.
Exactly. So if that's what you mean by morality, that's just the will to power.
Okay.
That in the end, the strong will survive and thrive, and the weak will be gobbled up and destroyed, or made to work for the strong. Again.
Over,
Yeah.
over.
So again, you're told you're a worm, you're sinful, you're guilty, you're terrible, and then this dude died for you 2,000 years ago. That's all taken care of now. You don't have to worry about it anymore. But he says that leads to self-centeredness, and that it leads to bad behavior, psychically,
Always.
physically, and socially. Ironically, that's essentially what social media is. It's just a whole bunch of people behaving badly and then arguing it and using it to justify it, to make money off of it, to get attention, to get a dopamine hit.
And is that because they see it as a moral enterprise, you think?
Well,
because we have virtue signaling, that part of social media.
Right.
But I mean, there's no atonement in it.
No.
Is there a masochism to it? There probably is.
Yes. I think it's sadomasochistic because, for example, you have,
well, Instagram filters.
Let's say conservatively, there are tens of thousands of young women on Instagram who make money from showing you their butt or their cleavage, and
they call it reels on Instagram, I think.
Yeah, reels. Yes. And then on TikTok, that's a whole nother lane.
Mm-hmm.
But the point being is that they will argue that they're feminists and that they are expressing their femininity, they're expressing their individuality, their independence by doing exactly what tens of thousands of other young women are doing, which is profiting off of showing their bodies.
And every man would like to see.
And yeah, essentially, right. And so is that moral to essentially sell yourself, sell your body for money? Is it moral?
In a virtual way? We'd say in a virtual way. Well, it's mostly harmless then, right?
Right, exactly. It's harmless. No, nobody's actually, going into some building off of, Main Street and paying
until these girls get trafficked, but yeah.
Well, that too, but just the fact that are these the Marian kind of girls, women? Are these the type of women you're going to bring home to mom in 10 or 20 or 30 years?
Yeah.
When their looks fade?
Not if they keep it up, I suppose.
What do you have as far as like a human being? What's inside of you as a human being? Because you are enslaving yourself and putting yourself into bondage to cultural pressure. Because that's what it is. It's cultural pressure. You look at like Kylie Jenner or going back to, Kim Kardashian or, just keep going backwards. It's the cultural pressure to be like, well, she's rich and famous because she did this. So I'm going to do that so that I can get a piece of that.
You mean like the father-in-law? Okay.
Yeah.
Or stepfather, I should say.
Stepfather. Exactly. And you ape culture, actually. But then because culture defines that as moral, the social contract, we've decided, well, that's moral because they're making money for themselves and they're, sloughing off the chains of the patriarchy and so forth and so on, that they're celebrated for doing nothing.
But ultimately, there's always somebody who benefits monetarily from these things.
Correct.
And it's not you, right?
No.
So,
No.
and then of course they inflict harm upon you inadvertently, or either inadvertently or intentionally, in order to perpetuate the system.
Right. Well, in the same way that buying a box of Twinkies isn't going to provide you with any nutritive value or benefit to your body, it's just 5 seconds of pleasure, mouth pleasure. Looking
Not really.
at you,
By the way,
I don't like them anymore either, but I'm just
Not
saying,
anymore.
For the average person or Doritos,
When you're a
pick your
kid.
poison, pick your poison, Hostess cupcakes, whatever. In the same way, you stare at pictures of half-naked women over and over and over and over and over again, and you're conditioning your mind to believe that that's beauty, that's feminism, that's what independence looked like. That's a good way to make a living if you can do it. And of course, men have capitalized on this too now. They took them a little bit of time to figure out like what they can capitalize on as far as their bodies, but they figured it out now. So it's the same thing. Men are prostituting themselves in the same way, or similar ways. But what it's doing is it's degenerative. That's the thing. Going back to Berlin in the 1920s, society degenerated into this depraved facsimile of a healthy society. And that's what you're seeing today is in our attempts to escape our bodies and our finitude and our mortality and our sin, we've created a virtual world full of moral codes and interactions and interfacing with each other that even 20 years ago would have been deemed questionable.
Right. So my question is, would Hitchens, when he would see these things, that are happening around us now, would he draw the connections and say, here is how this is like Christianity, but really it isn't, or the vicarious sacrifice of Christ in particular is absent from them. I mean, because the sacrifice is not made outside of you; it's made you're the one who makes the sacrifice.
Right.
And so I don't know. Again, I don't know if you would recognize that in the same way because it's very different.
Well,
we have bad
absent,
behavior in both
course,
cases.
What's absent is the conversation about love and the nature of love.
Oh, he's
and
just
the morality
dealing with
of love.
sacrifice. He's back to only sacrifice.
Yeah. What's the morality of love classically? Well, the morality of love classically is self-sacrifice, right?
Self-sacrifice, yeah.
So what happens then, and I'll use a controversial conversation because why not? So if I say that the greatest reward a woman can enjoy is making a sandwich for her husband, modern feminism has taught young women that is disgusting, repulsive, and just a sign of the patriarchy. It's oppressive. Now, if I said the ultimate expression of love is that a wife makes a sandwich for her husband, and then in turn a husband does something in kind for his wife, like make her a sandwich, now all of a sudden it's not that controversial, is it? Unless you're anti-love. And you don't understand that true love is self-sacrificial, meaning the greatest reward that I could receive as wife is to do something for my beloved. Now we're different. Now it's not husband-wife, it's beloved.
It's reciprocated. Yeah, and the problem with Christ...
reciprocated because love produces reciprocation. Unconditional love does.
Right. But that's the scandal of Christ is that he doesn't demand our love in return.
Correct.
And you look at it and like, no, he does. It's one way. And then the love that it produces is love for one another. But
right.
I mean, there's faith toward him. We trust him.
Correct.
But it's
that's
not
kind of Hitchens' point, though.
It's a one-way sacrifice.
Point. It's a one-way sacrifice, which then breeds bad behavior because we're not responsible. Therefore, the consequences aren't ours to bear.
Isn't this the antinomian argument?
Yes.
It's like it's going to breed licentiousness. That's as they said it in the antinomian disputation.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. Yes. Just like
the gospel.
Just like Antifa are actually fascists. The people that argue about antinomianism are themselves anti-law.
Nomians.
Yeah.
They want the law in place.
No, they're
restrain.
autonomians.
Autonomians.
The reason they're antinomian is because they want to be a law unto themselves. Exactly.
Okay.
So therefore, when they see someone like, hey, wait a minute, you're not obeying the law. Actually, they are. They're not obeying your law.
Okay.
And you just cover up your law with, but this is natural law. This is God's will. Swing by my house and I'll show you what natural law looks like.
It's chaos.
No, I mean, I'm going to punch you in the face.
Oh, okay.
Because the strong survive. That's natural law.
No, I was just joking. It's like the old trope, like children are meant to be silent.
To your point then, 100%. Then the strong, if natural law is the strong survive, come by my house and see my kids. They're savages. And the fact that they're all still alive and breathing is proof of the objective reality of natural law.
There you go.
But the point is then, what you end up with are people theologically who are like, well, you're not obeying the law. You're sinning against the law of God. And then they argue these pathetic Aristotelian virtue ethics that obviously they haven't read Aristotle. And likewise, then they don't recognize their own autonomian leanings.
Well, I mean, how often do we find people that are demanding morality, and then we find out they're actually some of the most immoral people
Well,
we
that
know.
too. But notice again, what's the sum of the law? Love God and love your neighbors yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So love me the way you need to be loved. The law of love has, it needs no compulsion. You don't need to be compelled to love me as yourself if you love me in the first place. And therefore, the only way that you could subject me to that kind of an accusation or judgment is if you don't love yourself.
Right.
And the only reason that you don't love yourself is because the love of Jesus Christ has not infiltrated your hard heart. So is wish thinking moral? I don't think it's moral at all to lie to children. When I'm meeting people of holy orders, I feel like I am meeting someone who is paid to lie to children.
If only he knew. I think he did know.
That's phenomenal. Well, like I said, he grew up in the Church of England, and yeah. I don't think that it's...
They call him kitty diddlers, right?
Kitty diddlers. I don't think that's a moral calling or an occupation to tell children that they should be terrified of hell, or if they do a right action, or if they avoid wrong actions as defined as inescapable, they might go to heaven. It's like George Carlin said, right? God loves you, but if you don't love him back, he's going to send you to hell to burn in fire forever. He's like, does that make any sense to anybody?
It's completely conditional. I guess
God is
that makes
unconditional love, and if you don't unconditionally love him back, he's going to send you to hell.
Then it's completely conditional. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, Carlin has a perfect point because he's only talking about God.
Mm-hmm.
God, proper noun, generic, deity. And this is a key thing. I tell people in my congregation this all the time. Stop having a knee-jerk reaction to people insulting God or putting down God or saying they don't believe in God. It's like saying, I don't like this table.
It might be the same God you reject. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So calm down and ask for specificity. What do you mean you don't believe in God? You don't believe in Jesus? You don't believe in Allah? You're not a big fan of Vishnu? Like, what do you mean you don't believe in God? Like all gods, all religions? Like, where are we at here?
This was in the news this morning. All this controversy among the conservative press about this high school graduate and saying, "In Allah we trust," and replacing God with Allah. And like, isn't that pretty as specific as the motto is actually?
Exactly.
It doesn't say in God the Father, the Son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit we trust.
Right.
I mean, it's not very specific, and
Right.
that's intentional.
Well, and I think his point too is Christians have to stop, or religious people in general have to stop claiming the moral high ground because they're religious.
Be honest about that. Yeah.
I think to him that's kind of the height of hypocrisy. Not that they're claiming that they're moral. Atheists, non-believers, agnostics, they claim to be moral, and then it turns out they're not, like you said.
But they have a corner on morality. Okay.
But that the religious folks in the cafeteria are like, we're the cool kids table. If you want to be good, you have to be with us. So lying to children. This is wicked. It ruined the childhoods of millions of children down the generations, including myself. We have some, but not all of their memoirs. There's certainly nobody in this room who does not know somebody whose life was effectively wrecked by this.
Right. So the kids find some kind of moral failing, and so then they assume what? Mm-hmm. That they're not moral then, in total.
Not moral, not welcomed in church, not going to heaven.
Not someone for whom Jesus died. Got it.
Correct. You can go back and read the Brothers Karamazov and Ivan Karamazov's struggle with his atheism and this whole question of morality and the goodness of people versus the evilness of people. And the whole struggle of, well, if I'm talking to Satan, then that means there's a God too. That kind of stuff.
At least some kind of spiritual reality.
Is that, like Hitchens points out, over and over and over again, you get these people, whether they're believers or not, or they're struggling to find their way through this, who look at the moral question posed by religion and answer with, well, like Jared just said, it ruined my life. Like your religion ruined my life.
This is Rod's rant about Sunday school, right?
Correct.
When it's
Jack
presented
Mormon's.
Jack Mormon's just moral teaching.
Correct.
Like you've missed the point.
Right. Your morality is not why you are saved or damned. And like you noted with the gatekeepers, the autonomians, that's the premise of their argument, their moral argument.
They have the high ground. And they don't have to defend it either.
Correct. That's why they just throw out terms like natural law. It's like natural law according to who? The pre-Socratics? Post-Socratics? Who?
But I mean, you have this in a secular world too. You have the righteous cause. And you're like, well, what makes it right?
Yeah. Yep. Turn or burn. That's why there's a famous, I can't remember who said it originally, but it stuck with me that there's a lot of Christians who back their way into heaven because they fear the flames of hell.
That
And as a
almost
pastor,
sounds like,
I've held that like in the front of my mind at all times, so that as a pastor, I never lapse into or try not to lapse. I'm conscious of not lapsing into the mindset of I'm a gatekeeper versus I'm going to take the cap off this fire hydrant and here's the water.
right.
My
Well, it's
job
the
is to
difference.
uncap it.
It's the difference between I guess what we've called like a negative theology, do this so that you avoid that versus the
Right.
positive. Here's Christ setting before you gifts,
Right,
come and
exactly.
receive.
Right. I look
yeah.
at it like that meme of the little girl smiling at the camera while the house is on fire in the background.
Did you saw that got turned into a non-fungible token?
Yes, I did. I saw that. Just last
NFT,
week.
she got like, what did she get for that picture? Like $280,000.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
In
And yet,
Ethereum. Yeah.
that's awesome. Good for you. But
To
I'm just
turn
saying that's,
a social media post into
Yeah.
great wealth. Yeah, I think so.
it's just great. So, this ruins children. And it has something else that's not moral or defensible, which is an implicit appeal to the totalitarian. Back to the gatekeepers. The origins of totalitarianism, our greatest enemy, lies in this. And this is, by the way, if you don't know, Hitchens was a vehement enemy of Islam. And there are many, many interviews where he has to defend himself to Western interviewers as to why Islam is a threat to Western society.
Right. And for that, I give great thanks to God for, because I think he's absolutely right when it comes to Islam.
No, yeah, 100%.
And there's a turn that you have to make to understand, I think, the Christian faith in its comparison to Islam. But he lumps them together. At least he does here. It's like,
Right, the monotheistic religions.
Well, and even the sacrificial aspect, like we talked about.
Yes.
What's missing, like you said, is the love, which they don't have in Islam.
Right.
I mean, Allah is capricious. He might like you today, he doesn't like you tomorrow. Who knows why?
Exactly. Well, if you try and leave, you have to die.
Then there's that part too.
If it's Orthodox.
It's Hotel California.
Right, exactly. Nice. Good reference there. So we are told that we would not know a right from wrong action, would not be able to tell, let alone to perform one, if we were not already the property of a celestial dictator, whom we must love and fear at the same time.
Okay, is this a straw man? Is he making a straw man here?
We'll see.
Okay.
Here we go. Compulsory love is a pretty horrible idea. I agree. The fear that goes with it is of little more than the negation of that. Yes. Let me give you an instance of what I mean. Here we go. I've been to all three of the axis of evil countries now. I'm the only writer who has. When I was a child, I caught a fever. Sorry, I just listened to Comfortably Numb the other day. When I was a child and I was told about heaven and hell, I could not form a picture of heaven because I was told it would be a place of eternal praise, everlasting praise and thanks all the time. Thanks and praise and thank you, and I praise you again forever for doing what appears to come to you naturally, for having made me out of a clot of blood. That sounded like hell to me. Of hell, of course, a child can be given an awful picture, and to many, many children never get over it. But I could not imagine what it would be like to live like that, forever praising. Right? That's good omens. Heaven has the best music, but hell has the best choreography.
Oh, that's good. There's a lot of poignant phrases from that book, man.
There really is. And by the way, what he's describing is not the biblical explanation of hell, but Dante's Inferno.
Yeah, and also not the biblical picture of heaven either, I think.
Exactly.
I mean,
No,
maybe
and
the
his
artificially
biblical picture of
characterized
heaven
one.
is also from Dante, it seems like.
Yeah.
But
Well,
most people
because-
don't know because they never make it past the Inferno.
Like, what's the new heavens and the new earth? And like, well, in heaven there'll be, nothing. You'll be doing nothing except for praising
Yeah.
all the time. Well, praising how? Well, vocationally,
yeah,
because you think there'll be no love. You'll still not serve one another, and
right.
like, what kind of world would that be?
Right.
We're all like just robots kneeling and bowing and scraping all day or something. It's like
Heaven is
weird.
Genesis 2. Read Isaiah. It's Genesis 2.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So I tell people, if you don't like earth, if you don't like what you see, minus the power lines and the tar and all the other crap that we've done to mess it up, you're going to hate the resurrection. Because that's what it comes down to.
That's Gnosticism.
Patrick. Thanks, SpongeBob.
No, I think he's referring to something else, but that's okay.
Either way, it doesn't matter. Just does that tell you how juvenile I am most of the time? I'm like, that's a SpongeBob reference.
Or
obviously.
how formative SpongeBob is on your life. Yeah, okay.
It's not. It's just, it's one of those things. It's just there.
It came right out, so it's got to be there.
Oh, yeah. No, it is. Well, now, I've been to North Korea, and I do know. The only duty or right of the half-starved citizen is to thank, for his or her handful of dirty rice every day, the dear leader who makes it possible. There is no other culture or films or plays or classes in school or programs on TV and the radio. They are all about the same thing. You have to thank the dear leader.
Did you see the story about K-pop?
Yes, that Kim Jong talked about. Yeah,
Kim Jong-un. Yes, that he banned K-pop and what it was like 15 years in prison.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't have a problem with that.
Well, because the very next day there was a story about how the number one K-pop band was created by AI.
No kidding.
Yeah,
nice.
It's an entirely artificial creation. Oh. They animated the characters, the band members, the whole deal. They're all just caricatures. The music was made up by the computer. The whole deal.
We're in such a silo in the West. Like,
so maybe Kim Jong Un is like, it's part from being the leader and all that. But
I stopped and paused just because I'm reading this. I'm like, oh, you mean just like COVID and vaccination information and censorship and deleting people?
Well, we're going to get there, it looks like.
They're all the same thing. You have to thank the dear leader. Would that were enough. The dear leader is only the head of the party in the army in North Korea. He's not the president. The president is his father, who's been dead for 15 years. Did you know that? North Korea has a dead president. It's a necrocracy. There we go. Necrocracy. Thanatocracy.
Ooh, I like
a Mazelacross. Come on, man.
Do you think he had to practice these words?
He had to have.
Yeah.
So it's mausoleum and cross. Mazalacrossy.
Thanos meaning death.
Thanatocracy. I can go with that one, and even necrocracy. I can get but not
Mazelocracy.
Mazel tov.
Mazelocracy. I got it.
There we go. Mazelocracy. It's a death cult.
There you go.
You may have noticed it's only one short of a trinity, and the son is the reincarnation of his father.
No, the sister now. So I think they get the three. Okay.
Now I know what it would be like, and I wasn't able in the article I wrote to begin to describe the horrific pointlessness and misery of what it was like to be in North Korea, even for half a day. None of you can imagine it, but it's what theocracy wants you to imagine and be grateful for. And I will add this. At least you can effing die and get out of North Korea. It is the only way you can leave that hermetic nightmare. Not so in mortuism. When you die is when the totalitarianism really begins.
But what about the basketball player guy, right? Rodman, right?
Yeah.
Dennis Rodman.
Yeah,
it's like,
absolutely.
yeah, we're best buds. We get along with him.
Exactly.
I still can't figure out how that followed.
Because at the end of the day, even if you're a reincarnated president, you're still a human being, and you still fan out.
You watch NBA? Okay.
Oh, come on. You know Kim Jong-un's palace, he's dead, but his sister's palace.
Did I send you a while ago the book list from Osama bin Laden's cave?
Yeah, yeah.
And the video lists, and he had a lot of porn in there. I mean, he's pretty Western. I mean, he went to Western schools, but it was interesting.
How to lie
the
with
books.
Statistics.
Yeah, how to lie with statistics. It was. I mean, it's like right in there.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, he's one of them.
Yes. Well, what was his CIA name when he was working for the CIA in the 80s? What was his cover name? That's a whole long story, too. Like, the CIA knew he was in the United States after the World Trade Center bombings. He was in the United States. They knew he was there because he was working for them.
It was
he
like
was on
those
the payroll.
It was like those German spies that got off the submarine and at New York and made it all the way to Chicago before anybody figured it out.
Right, exactly.
Like, wait a minute. John Cullen, right, was the guy who figured it out. Like, 82 years ago now, I think.
Tim Osmond, that's what it was.
Tim Osmond? Really?
Yeah, his cover name for the CIA was Tim Osmond.
What? I thought he was this. Yeah, well, anyway.
Yeah. But isn't that the best? Tim Osmond? You walk at the airport, you go through customs at the airport and like, welcome to America, sir. Name? Tim Osmond.
It probably didn't have the beard, wasn't it? It was more of a Tim beard.
My name is Tim Osmond. It doesn't matter.
Well, what's the movie reference there with Tim? His name was Tim. Was that Young Frankenstein? No. What is it? Which one is it? I don't know, Tim. I'll think of it.
I only know the Replacements album, Tim.
There you go.
So who wants this to be true? Who wants eternal tyranny like North Korea? Who but someone servile and stupid and pathetic wants it to be true that they can be convicted of thought crime at any minute of the day or night as they're sleeping for thinking the wrong thing?
Santa Claus. Okay. Yeah.
You know what's interesting is he's so close to Luther right here.
Uh-huh.
Because this is Luther's complaint about living in the monastery. Who wants to be always in debt to someone who never asked them if they wanted the loan in the first place? Who wants this?
There it is.
All
Tim
of
the
us
Enchanter.
all of us who as Americans oppose the very idea of unfreedom and tyranny must say that this is where the resistance to totalitarianism really begins, by the repudiation of religion and by the defiance of theocracy. That's where the battle for our values has to start. Religion abolishes obligation to live in truth. A very important part of our personal integrity. It caters to our worst solecism and our worst masochism simultaneously, plus denies us our self-respect. Hello, last 16 months.
Solecism, a breach
Tim
of good
the Enchanter
manners.
from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. There you go. Paul nailed it.
Yeah, he did. He figured it out.
Tim the Enchanter. Thank you.
Okay,
That's
so
why
now I
we're
know
here.
what straw man he's fighting against. Well, I don't know if it's a straw man, but what do you want to call him? The figure, right? The thing that he's fighting against is the fusion of Christian faith with government, with theocratic government, with governing of society.
Yeah.
Right. Now we do believe that the Christian faith has an effect upon society, but
Yes.
but we are, I think both you and I would reject the theocratic, approach.
Very much so.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what it did to the faith. Ultimately, I'm not so concerned about the government, more to the faith, like in all of Western Europe, wherever there was, let's say, a Lutheran church. What is it today?
What it did is destroyed people's faith in the church, and then in the absence of the church and the death of God movement, it gave rise to new gods that were even more arbitrary and capricious than the old gods.
Right.
And were death gods, as he notes out, the death cult. And as a consequence, that's why we have what we have today, this horrific God called the science, and its saints and prophets, and its cathedrals and churches, academia, public education, Fauci, the media, is that you took away the old gods. But at the very least, they were life-affirming gods. They were gods that pitied us. The gods today don't pity us. The gods today don't care about us. And therefore, they're life-denying gods. And so what we're left with is, as a consequence, an even worse thing than what was in place before. The institutions that took over for the church and became the new churches are more horrific and more terrible than... So if the Lutheran Church of Germany in the late 1800s was a totalitarian institution, hypothetically, when God was declared dead by society, and society decided to move on from God and adopt a new God, the God of science, the God of progress, the God of industry, they erected new churches and cathedrals. They listened to new prophets and priests. And it was worse, which is why the 20th century was called the century of genocide. Because as
progress
horrific
and
as
genocide right next to each other.
Exactly. Like I said, right? In order to create a utopia, you also have to do it on the back of a dystopian reality. I've got to murder.
Ooh. Oops.
Let's say I want 500 million people to live on the earth at one time, and there's billions of people on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in order to create my utopian society where there's 500 million people and there's plenty of resources for everybody, I've got to figure out how to eliminate the other billions of people. Or at the very least, elevate myself above them physically, geographically, in such a way that I never have to interface with them.
Right. And if you can be clever enough about it, you can do it in a way where they actually willingly do it to themselves.
Correct. That's
I
the
mean,
best.
that's the best because then you're not the bad guy,
Correct. Right.
even though you are. But yeah,
Hmm?
as long as you
Well,
can confuse people.
I use a really vulgar, gross example since he brought it up earlier. In Mexico, where I lived at one time, the Roman Catholic Church, it's 99% of the population. Even those who aren't Roman Catholic are Roman Catholic in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And as a consequence, people, even though people knew and know and have known for centuries actually, that the church was engaged with human trafficking all the way back to the conquistas. People are aware of this. People were aware of what the church was doing to their children, but they allowed it because it was institutionalized. And then it spread to the Protestant church, and then it became institutionalized and normalized in the Protestant churches in Mexico. And then it gave birth to Saint Death. And so that's the patron saint of the drug cartels, the god Death, right? And so you go to the border, you go anywhere in Mexico, you can buy statues of Saint Death, right? Santo Muerte. And so what the church did, because of its perversion and abuse of its own people, is opened a path so that the people turned away from the church and its saints to Santo Muerte, Saint Death. Again, it's the same thing that Hitchens is talking about. They joined a death cult because the option to this God, these holy men, so to speak, again, who claim the moral high ground,
Right.
who have profited physically, psychically, and financially off of the backs of the Mexican people for centuries. Well, this is just, we can't do this anymore. And so we erect new saints, new cathedrals, new gods.
What's that?
And by the way,
better
in
the
the new
devil you know, right?
Well, the drug cartels are more beneficent than the Roman church.
Oh, you mean kind of like taking out a big loan from the Chinese Communist Party to fund
Yeah.
your church? Sure.
Fund your church, fund your campaign, whatever it might be. So and this is Nietzsche's argument, and is that the Christian church laid the groundwork for its own destruction through its abuse and perverted exploitation of people. And finally, people woke up and went, "We're done. We're done.
Right.
We quit."
But that's not, I think the important thing to learn from biblical history, if you want, even modern history, is that that's not the end of the church. It's the end of the institution.
Correct.
That has come to represent, the true institution.
If the institution had any humility, it would repent publicly.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. And
That's the
say,
difference between the church and the institution.
right, what have we added? What is getting in the way of Jesus?
Right.
What have we
done?
become? Yeah.
Right, exactly. What
Or
have we become?
was it Nehemiah? We find the book of the law, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
we should read this again.
Right.
Yeah, let's
Right.
read it from start to finish.
Right.
Again, we haven't done it for a while.
But institutionally, as Capon said in Astonished at Heart and other places, that the primary purpose of a religious institution is not getting grace out the door; it's self-preservation. And as he says, the church as an institution will cut grace off at the knees to preserve itself, which you and I have both seen firsthand.
Sure.
And we have scars because of it. And the only reason I'm still in the church is by the Holy Spirit's power.
Sure.
And
That's
you
true.
too. We both know that we don't belong here for various reasons, both personal and professional. And again, just people that are out of our control that determine that you and I don't belong in the church or should be pastors. And yet we're still here. So I think that gives you and I the perspective of we're within the institution, and there's certain things within the institution that we can respect and give regard to, like individuals. But as a whole, it's a monster. And it just consumes. It just consumes and consumes, and it's just this voracious, bottomless pit.
Right, but my point is that God brings judgment upon it
And
eventually.
that's what I'm saying, though, is that this is like Jeremiah then, is that you're going to go into slavery with your people. You're going to go into exile with your people. And you're going to continue to preach to them while they're in exile, because this is how I'm going to repent them and bring them back.
It's almost as if that's a purer version.
Yeah.
You don't have your temple. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why that's a problem.
Right.
But those,
So I think,
yeah.
This is why we've said that people like Hitchens are so useful, because they uncover your golden idols. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
And this is what, in my opinion, I think is what's happening right now, is that we're being repented. And That's why there's so much discord in the churches. Because churches are closing, churches are staying closed, churches are segregating, churches are trying to figure out, like, what do we do? And of course, a lot of churches are just sitting around waiting for the new normal to kick in, which is the old normal, just with a new, like, coat of paint. Because like I said,
and more, insect protein. But anyway.
That too. Like I was saying to my wife, everything that's happening now was happening before. It's just that more people are able to access the data and the video evidence and see the receipts.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that you and I talk about has been going on for over 100 years for the most part, or at least for generations. Sure. We're not saying anything that's new or radical. We're just pointing out this has been going on, and now we have access to the receipts.
Well, that's why we can post quotes from, Orwell or Huxley or Solzhenitsyn, or, it doesn't, any of these really what ends up being end time prophet, type characters, and say, they warned us, and they saw it. They saw it in different areas, different, different countries, different culture. It's worldwide. It's everywhere.
Who's the defector from the early 80s? Yuri, the famous video where he warns us about communism.
I still think it's hilarious that video wasn't discovered until they used it for Call of Duty.
Right.
Cold War. And then everybody's like, who is this guy? And it's like, did they make this up? And like, no, it's actually legit. I found it right on YouTube.
Yeah. It's been around forever.
Defector, Yuri.
But yeah, early 80s. Same thing with the CIA director in the early 80s, like 83, talking about how they...
Now, who was that? Because you mentioned him earlier, and I don't know.
I can remember. He was CIA director, ex-CIA director in the early 80s, talking about the change and how they're going to engage in PSYOP and information warfare.
Yuri Bezmenov.
That's it, Bezmenov. Yeah.
1984 is the video. But in 1970, he defected to Canada.
Yes.
And he wrote a book called, in 1984, Love Letter to America. And then there's a 1-hour presentation and then a 4-hour compilation. All right, so I'm going to link to this article. It has all the
Yuri
links
Bezmenov.
This is from the Jewish News Syndicate, so that's a interesting course. Anyway.
I can't believe I just tried to Google search something important. I got to go to DuckDuckGo, sorry.
What?
Silly.
You typed in Google into your...
No, I have to use Google for the stream.
Right, you're on... Well, you can still change your default.
No, I'm saying engine. I was in Google and I accidentally just hit a tab in Google and did a search rather than just switch over. I got DuckDuckGo open.
Oh, you mean the browser DuckDuckGo?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha. All right.
But, no, I think... Just looking up his name. That what's happening, John Brennan... No, it's not him.
Brennan's an interesting character. Oh, boy.
Yeah.
That's a rabbit trail you don't want to go down. He's going to get burned here
John
eventually.
O'Neill. It was John O'Neill or Richard Clark. Not Richard Clark.
Oh, you're talking about the CIA director. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to know this.
Yeah. But anyways, there's a former CIA guy in the early 80s who basically warned us about the coming way in which the intelligence community in the United States was going to engage in PSYOPs within the United States, which was to not redact information, but to flood us with too much information so that we couldn't distinguish between facts and lie anymore because there was just too much data. So essentially it would be like trying to find a spoonful of fresh water in an ocean of salt water.
Right.
So
we will kill people based on metadata.
That's, yeah.
And Michael Hayden was that guy.
There's Hayden. Wow. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you get on that rabbit hole back to the early 80s. There was a lot of stuff popping in the early 80s. But again, because of the lack of access to it, it just sat there. And very few people had access to it. And the people that did, especially in the late 80s or early 90s, those are the guys that you ran into in like college and stuff where you're like, you are out of your mind. They're like, no, dude, I found this video, this VHS tape that my cousin gave me. You're like, you are out of your mind. And then, like you said, then you discover it years later on YouTube. And you're like, oh, I guess he wasn't crazy after all.
Yeah, like the black helicopters.
Like the black helicopters, exactly. Now, who wants this to be true? Who but someone servile and stupid and pathetic wants it to be true that they can be convicted of thought crime at any minute of the day or night as they're sleeping for thinking the wrong thing? That's a great paragraph. I love that. I'm going to use that in the sermon on Sunday. Mm-hmm. So on the betrayal... So to say, I've evolved 3 challenges. Well, 2 really. One takes a dual form. On this matter of ethics and morality, I say to every cleric I've debated with, and all of their audiences. And I've said it on the Christianity Today website, countless TV and radio shows, in print hundreds of times, public platforms dozens of times, and I've not yet had an answer.
Okay,
If you
here we
say
go.
that morality can only be derived from a supernatural authority dictatorship, then you must be able to name for me an ethical statement made or ethical action performed by a believer that could not have been performed by a non-believer, by an infidel, that would be forbidden to them, unavailable and inaccessible. Can you do it? They haven't yet. The challenge has been out for quite a long time.
I'll tell you how I faked it. But it's like, it looks like love, but it's not,
Correct.
you know? I mean, I don't know if that's faking it, but, because it's always selfish at the same time. Well, but how does that any different than a Christian's action? You know?
How often, though, when Christianity goes wrong, does it drift directly into morality?
Yeah.
Almost every time?
System of ethics. Yeah.
Other than Gnosticism, maybe?
Yeah. Either controlling the local community, controlling, government, controlling business. Even we have like Christian bakers and that kind of stuff.
Right.
I'm like, that's not Christianity. That's not Jesus.
Yeah. Whereas if I can just mention my corollary, if I ask any audience member, not just this one, but any audience, I did it in Georgetown University, one of the headquarters of the Catholic faith in this country, night before last.
Jesuit, by the way.
Jesuit. Illuminati. Can they think of a wicked action performed that could only have been performed in the name of God or other divine instruction? No one has any hesitation in recognizing or identifying an example. Now, as long as this remains the case, it is they who have to do the explaining, they who owe the accounting, they who owe the apology, and not us, and we must be plain on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So if the faith is primarily about moral instruction, then why this faith and not another?
Right.
That's ultimately his question. Why?
Yeah.
Why be a Christian or whatever?
Yeah.
And we've talked about this with the, what do you say, the noble pagans, as the Roman Church calls them. It's like, yeah, no, there's some things that are self-evident, I suppose, right?
Right.
Protecting life for the most part. Well,
Yeah.
if you think it's worth living, I suppose. That's
Yeah.
the family unit based off of biology, male and female. I mean, that's biology. It's science, not really particularly,
Right.
based on any kind of faith. I don't think.
That's a great quote I heard this morning from Candace Owens of People. She said, "You can't outthink biology."
Well, you can try, I suppose.
Well, lots of
Right.
people are.
Did you see that coming out party video? Where this girl comes out as a boy, and then talking about how her mom hates her and uses her dead name and calls her by not her preferred pronouns.
Mm-mm.
Well, that was interesting. I should have saved the link because it's so abstract for so many people. They're like, oh, this is not how it. You're Don Quixote. You're going around chasing windmills. Like, no, actually, this is happening. I mean, I've had people, middle school, rural Wisconsin, parents coming to me like, this is what my daughter's talking about. I'm like,
Same here.
whoa.
Yeah.
And you're like, this. I mean, this part of Wisconsin's not that liberal. I mean, vote Republican.
Right.
Kind of
Same here.
It's like,
Exactly.
no, but it's in the school. It's there. And it's being promoted, and it's a protected class actually.
Correct.
So of course you're going to at least consider behavior, actions, whatever, that are going to get you recognition and respect and protection.
Right. Well, this is what's important to this point, though, to me, as a side note. You as a child have to be taught these things.
Of course.
This is indoctrination. This is not, quote unquote, natural. You have to be indoctrinated into this. You have to be taught critical race theory. You have to be taught that this is, quote unquote, reality. But what happens then as a consequence, because they start in kindergarten with this crap, is that by the time you become 18 years old, you've been conditioned to see it everywhere, just like with the patriarchy. So you just walk around paranoid all the time, waiting, looking.
Systematic. Yeah, those words.
Systematic patriarchy, systematic oppression, systematic racism, systematic this, systematic that. Yeah. And essentially what ends up happening then, of course, is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And by the time you're an adult, you don't even realize that you've been a victim of government-approved indoctrination. Like in
Right.
Minnesota,
Well,
it's actually called government-approved speech.
it's playing off of especially I think adolescent girls, but I think boys too. That need for acceptance and to be welcomed and be part of a community, and especially if that
Right.
community is being, like I said, protected by not only the teachers and administration and the curriculum even
Right.
is saying that this is a protected class and it's noble and virtuous and whatever.
Right.
Why wouldn't you?
Right.
Well, it's mass psychosis too. I mean, you have that other aspect then too. It becomes a
Well,
mob
and it's
mentality.
ongoing. It is institutional. It's been ongoing because we're an hour and 54 into this, so I can say this now. No one's listening. In the church, for example, generations of clergy being raised to be soft, like pillow soft. You see it when you look at them. They look like they're carrying
Winsome was
pillows.
the word that they used when I was at seminary.
Winsome or overweight, soft man babies.
Oh, you mean
They're
like
feminized.
Winnie the Pooh?
Yes, they're effeminate. They're emasculated. They're soft. They're not alphas. They're betas. And you grow up in church seeing that, and then you grow up at home hearing it, and you watch TV, and pop culture does it. Every sitcom TV show you can see, what do you have? You have an alpha female who's hard and a beta male who's soft. And you grow up seeing that, and then you go to school and have it reinforced constantly through public education. And then 1 hour a week, maybe 1 hour a week, or for your lesson in Sunday school, you're taught about David, the mighty warrior, or about Joshua or something. That goes over. That's a teaspoon of water in the ocean. So then you grow up and you become a part of it because it's normalized. And then you look around and you complain about it, even though you're a part of it. And you don't see your part in it. You don't take a step back and say, well, I'm soft and I'm the beta and I'm not exhibiting classical masculine attributes and virtues. And by the way, on the flip side, then women
Or
aren't
toxic masculine attributes,
no such
actual
thing.
toxic ones.
But yeah, actual toxic ones that are abusive and just
Right.
deserve to get buried under the prison. But the point being then again is that we flipped everything upside down backwards. And even the people in the church who are called to call out this stuff and stand against it are participating in it. And then we just invent soft language like winsome to describe something that we know when we look in the mirror isn't right. It's not moral. It's not masculine or feminine. It doesn't. And then you ask, well, why is the family? Where's the family? Where'd that go? Why is it that I just posted the information this morning, but about 80% of most boys are raised by women exclusively. 80%. That doesn't mean that they don't have fathers. That means that at school, the teachers are women. At home,
Right.
the mom runs the house. At church, the women run the church. And so a boy is raised to believe that he's toxic because of his gender by predominantly women who have grown up and become hard because they've been taught by second wave feminism and now third wave feminism that not only can a woman do anything a man can do, a woman can be a man and should be treated equally, not just in relation to like pay and vocation and opportunities, but physically, biologically. And so you see a systemic attack on gender. And it's purposeful because at a certain point, you can't just say it's an accident of time or an accident of culture that for 5 or 6 generations, this has been ongoing and just keeps building up steam. So then the clergy get in the pulpit, soft, squishy, effeminate, talking about manhood and fatherhood and family. It's like, get real.
Right.
You're a part of the
Right.
problem.
Well, both you and I have received, I don't want to say if it's criticism, that's probably a fair enough word, criticism for being single income homes. Well, we're not single income. Single full-time income plus part-times.
Plus
Right.
all the other things that you and I do to hustle.
Yeah, all the side hustles, but in the end, to make that voluntary choice to have, our wives be mothers, and homemakers,
Right.
which is like, talk about countercultural, I guess, at this
Right.
point, especially when you have, our newest administration, well, I don't know if it's ours, but whatever, that administration saying that, we're going to have your kids basically from infancy until, 2 years into college, right?
Correct.
We're going to pay for the whole thing. We'll have mandatory child care is provided and
Correct.
compulsory, I should say. And we'll have them most of the day and we'll take care of them for you so that both you and your husband can work. And we're like, is that what we want to do? Is that really? Well,
Right.
maybe we should push back on this presumption. I mean, can you imagine if you had, especially in Washington, politicians coming out and saying, you know what, we're going to restructure our tax code to promote single income homes and to provide enough income so that, they
Right.
can have the American dream again, right? Remember the home and the car and the garage and the whole deal,
Right.
right? And mom takes care of the kids, and dad goes to work.
Right.
Like, what? That's not even thinkable, right? I mean,
And by the way, that's literally my dream life.
yeah,
Like if you said to me, you can stay home all day, take care of the kids, somebody else will make sure that the bills are paid and there's food on the table. All you need to do is X, Y, and Z. I'd be like, wait, you're serious?
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I do that.
Yeah, and you can go, have lunch with your lady friends, and
Right. But the point then is that in the present tense, it's actually controversial for you or I to say women are naturally nurturers and men are naturally protectors. And that when that goes askew, the family goes to crap, but then as a consequence, society goes to crap as well.
well,
And everything
or
gets
aggressive
turned-
defensive, I suppose. You could
Correct.
put it
Exactly.
that way too. Yeah.
Right. And then you look around and go, well, who's going to take care of the church? Well, if the women don't, the men aren't going to step up to do it. Well, who's going to take care of the family? Well, if the women don't step up to do it, the men aren't going to. Well, who's going to take care of society? Well, if the women don't step up. I mean, I was reflecting on this morning. If you look at both the DNC and the GOP, who's running the show predominantly for both political parties now, gender-wise? It's women.
Beta men and women.
Beta men, exactly. You look at the men, and at least I do. I look at these men. I'm like, well, no, no. I'm sorry, man. No, no.
We look at the women and are like,
Yeah,
that's a strong woman.
yeah, exactly, 100%. And power to them. And yet, was it out of a necessity that happened? I think so. Because you look at the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment, and you see things happening, bubbling back then. Then you see the People's Revolution, Mao's Revolution in the 50s, and you see what happened then, and you're like, oh, yeah, we're tracking. I get where we're going
Right,
now.
but in one sense, they can get away with it. I mean,
Yeah.
that the women can, and that for now anyway, they're not. Well, they do get attacked, but they can they can be bold and dramatic and still not get as much pushback as the men might for being aggressive. Yeah,
Right. So I think that in and of itself, then, because it might seem like we went down a long rabbit trail, and we did, but it's a kind of a tributary of this whole conversation by Hitchens, which is if the church is going to take a moral high ground, they should take a step back and first do a self-audit
right.
and ask themselves, okay, are we perpetuating the very worst aspects of a degraded and perverse culture, or are we standing against it?
I would say, is it a self-constructed morality as well?
Right. Because to your point earlier, are we trying to change culture while participating in it? Like in this kind of like weird, like not like ignorance, like we're participating in this, but we're trying to change it simultaneously. Or are we standing against it and preaching against it? Maybe in the sense of like, don't be like that. Jesus called us to be in the world, but not of the world. Or do we lock the doors and say, we're just going to ride this baby out and we'll come out after the bombs go off and the radiation goes away? Like, because you see the church doing this throughout history, like we're just going to close the doors and wait this one out. Others, we're going to engage in culture because we can change it. And then at other times they just get, again, we're participating in the culture in order to change it. It's like somebody who says, well, I'm going to become a part of the institution to reform the institution. And then they become institutionalized every time. But again, it's always right that the outsider who has no horse in the game, so to speak. And I mean, Hitchens does have definitely several horses in the race as far as like his brand and his money and everything else. But
Sure.
But he can at least stand outside and go, okay, the reason that I don't play the same game as you and I don't have a horse in this race is because of these reasons. And rather than the church saying, maybe he's got a point, instead the institution says he has no point, he's a threat, cut him off, get rid of him.
Well, and I think what he's criticizing, if I were going to say it in a different way, is that he's criticizing the way the church is often prescriptive and saying, here's how it must be done, rather than simply being descriptive. I mean, no, stay-at-home dad is possible. Is it ideal? I don't know. I guess it depends on the guy. But when I talked about like that ideal lifestyle, I guess it's not because that lifestyle itself is ideal. It's because the scriptures itself gives particular roles to mom and dad. To say, here's your responsibility. Of course, we talked about biology. I mean, you don't even need the scripture for that. To say nurture versus nurture, nature, nurture. Yeah, that's it. These things are I shouldn't say they're self-evident, but they're observable, right? And consequently, there are probably certain paradigms that work better than others, for a home, to structure a home. And it's just because of the nature of how things are, right?
Correct.
And that But again, it's not the Bible or the church that's prescribing those things necessarily. We're just saying, reflecting on what we've been given to do, here's a way to do this, right?
Right. For example, I just received a text message right now. Do you want me to read it to you?
Okay, real time.
Ball games, fishing trips, the state fair. Summer in Minnesota is the best. Tickets to some of the state's most popular attractions are just a shot away. Get your first vaccine now to earn your prize.
Okay, I got it. Yeah.
Getting vaccinated has never been easier or more rewarding. Hi, this is the Minnesota Department of Health with info about COVID-19 vaccines near you. Message and data rates may apply. Reply stop anytime to stop receiving messages.
How many times have you told them to stop?
Are you interested in getting the COVID-19 vaccine? Mark A for yes, B for probably yes, C for I'm not sure, D for probably not, or E, no, already vaccinated. Para español, responda español. I like how there's no option for no, just no.
Middle finger emoji?
No, the
they didn't
final
give you that.
offer is no, I've been vaccinated. Not no, I'm not, but no, I've been vaccinated. Literally every answer has to be positive.
Well,
It
that's
literally goes to your point that you just made.
painting you into a corner. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Here's how you
prescriptive.
have to. Here's what you have to do. Yep.
Yep. You want to have fun in Minnesota? Here's what you got to do. Plus, there's rewards. I mean, how could you not want to get injected with a cytotoxin when you can get rewards? I mean, sure, it
I don't know.
penetrates the blood-brain barrier, and
I don't know. I'd like spike protein depositing in my organs. That sounds like fun.
cleaving my cells. Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great. Third challenge. Well, you want to bring it to a close on this one, and then
Yeah, we should do that.
because he's got a long way to go. Like, this is a long acceptance speech. But so if you I have a third challenge, he says, which is to those who say, the president is one of them, by the way, that in these matters that can't yet be decided, where we come from, our cosmos, our species, we should teach the argument and share equal time, meaning teach evolution and creationism. Teach the Big Bang and Genesis. The president is too stupid to know that there is not really an argument about this anymore. I do believe he's referring to George W.
2007,
Because wasn't Obama 2008?
2008. Yep.
Okay. Too stupid. Okay, great. Tell us how you
That's-
really feel.
Yeah, but I don't know if I disagree. Keep going.
There used to be one, and when there was, when we weren't quite certain, the line of the churches was that the teaching of evolution and Darwinism should be banned altogether. They did not want equal time then. It's so petulant. Notice the switching of their gears. When they were strong enough to try to ban it, that's what they wanted to do. Now they're not strong enough. They've come up with a weedy, feeble, ingratiating whine of, well, equal time, fair dues, open-mindedness, and so on. My body, my choice. As if there really was a dispute about this. All right, let's see if we can accommodate them.
Yeah, similar to prayer in public schools, by the way.
Yeah.
Like,
So I
what's to
learned
prevent you from praying in public school? Not much.
Nothing.
Actually.
You could pray at your desk. It's cool. Go for it.
Yeah,
You want to pray?
exactly.
Go for it. You can pray. I learned about Darwin by studying the debate between Bishop Wilberforce and Thomas Huxley. That's a classic debate. I was not taught it in science class. I was taught it in history class. That's how I learned. I've learned since, as you have, about the debate between Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan, the idol of all morondom, as H.L. Mencken called him, in Dayton, Tennessee. I learned about that in history and literature class, not biology class. Keep it out of there, because otherwise we'll be having people saying, well, children chemistry period is over, but we'll be doing alchemy in the next half. I'm not really seeing the downside of that. It sounds like fun.
Well, that's
Put away
Marxism, by the way, is alchemy.
It is.
But that's
It
a whole
is.
other story.
Put away your astronomy books and get out your astrology charts, because we are open-minded in this school, and other stultifying nonsense that you wouldn't even get at a madrasa. I shouldn't think. But if we are to accept the principle, then let us say to the president and his friends, by all means, equal time. Any church that is tax exempt, therefore, any religious group that gets a break from the IRS, any church that is in receipt of any monies at all from the so-called faith-based initiative, must give 50% of its time to the teaching of evolution by natural selection. You might take that back to your communities and tell them to suck on that and see if they like it, because that's what they seem to be asking, but are too stupid to realize. We are not resisting them. We are on their trail now. We've got their number, and we are on their track. They are the ones who should be scared of us. Don't you think it's about time? I do.
This is why I've never understood the whole God and country bit. It's like, really? Why do you want to conflate the two? Which is what I mean. That's the argument. That's who he's talking against, right?
Correct.
It's like we need God taught in the schools. We need creation taught in the school. No, you don't. Well,
You do if you want to control a majority of the population.
as what? Control them for what purpose?
Whatever you need them to do
Well,
politically,
to come
socially.
to church, I guess.
No, I'm saying broadly speaking.
Oh, I see.
If
Yeah.
a majority of the country is quote unquote Christian or at the very least religious, let's just say religious, that's how you control a population of people. This is, again, why the Reagan campaign figured out that we got to appeal to the Southern evangelical voter bloc.
I do wonder what Hitchens would say about all these tax credits and breaks, with the IRS.
Yeah.
He's like, well, so what's the purpose of them? And, would he defend them or would he say that they're a waste of money? Because, I mean, I think if you push him to shove, he'd probably just say, get rid of them all.
Right.
But historically, I think what the government is doing there is saying there's something being taught in these institutions that's worth supporting, financially. Same reason we get like child tax credit and
Right.
What's the other one? Earned income credit. Trump got rid of
I
it.
like
but now
them.
it's
I enjoy
back.
them. If I had
Yeah.
to give them away to get rid of taxes altogether, I'm 100% for it.
Sheesh, yeah, right. Well, especially if it were a flat tax on consumption.
Right. Well, maybe the difference is that in 2007, Hitchens didn't have, again, the same access to information that we do today. Like just this past week, we know that half of the triple P loans went to Russia, China.
70% went overseas.
Yeah, 70% went
70%.
overseas. We're complaining about Pakistan and gender studies, which of course was there on purpose.
27% of those in California went to cartels.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
we
the whole
literally
thing-
funded the
but
cartels
remember-
and we're funding international governments.
Everybody was complaining about Pakistan gender studies, which was a distraction, obviously, to keep us distracted from where the chunk of this money was going to. And now that we know, guess what? No one cares.
No, because we don't want need-based, actual accountability, because then that
Correct.
means we don't get our check either.
Correct. Exactly. Yep.
It's a lot easier to say, just send me some money. I don't care if you end up sending your money to a bunch of people I don't care about, as long as I
Right,
get my
exactly.
money.
Yep.
It's inherently selfish. Yeah.
Exactly. So we'll end there and then
Okay.
pick it up again in the next 2 or 3 or 10 episodes with what he's, because this is where that paragraph that I just read, where it seems like he kind of changes his whole attitude. Like he goes from being cheeky to just outright insulting. That's him switching gears. He's going to get into the meat of his actual point now from here on out.
Yeah, that's what I was saying about his rhetoric, right? That
Yeah.
he kind of spins you in, draws you in, and then you're like, so that you listen to what he has to say. Now but he's actually in a sense preaching to the choir here. I mean,
Yeah.
he's speaking to fellow atheists in their
exactly.
society.
Exactly. Yeah.
But he's doing the
He-
same
yeah.
thing with them. He's saying what they want to hear.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's my challenge, I think, to listeners is spend 3 months, spend the entire summer, or whenever you're listening to this, spend 3 months in the book of Judges. Read the book of Judges, okay? Now, use that as your primary biblical text for your Christian faith, your piety, and how you live out your vocation. And just try it for 3 months and see what happens as a consequence.
You're not going to make it 3 months.
But there's that
Spoiler.
book, the guy that tried to live it like Jesus did for like a year or something like that. It's
It's kind of like the guy who tried to live on McDonald's for a year.
Well, yes. Well, there's one that living as Jesus for a year. There's another one, living according to like kosher law or Jewish law, Levitical law for a year, something like that. Like somebody else did it in that sense too. But just live with the book of Judges for like 3 months and see how it changes your reading of the rest of the Bible, first of all. But just your overall attitude toward preaching, towards church, towards God, towards your neighbor, towards yourself. Because I think what happens, like we've said, is that we essentially segregate books of the Bible that conflict with the way in which we want to live and the way that we want to engage in church and the way that we want to engage with our families and our culture.
Or even the way we want to understand our history. I think that's
Correct.
part of it too.
Right. Yeah. Maybe even more importantly. And as a consequence, then we look around and go, well, why is this happening? Well, mix it up, change it up, switch your perspective. Let a different word of God speak to you from Scripture. Not that there's a different word of God, but I just mean in literary terms.
Mm-hmm.
Read the Psalms, read Judges. Read the Psalms and Judges, and then the Gospel of John. And spend the summer with those three things and see what happens. Get a different perspective, get a different approach to, like I said, because I think too, I would love to sit down, with atheist me at 22 or 23 and read the book of Judges with him again, read the Psalms with him again, read John with him again and go, this is what we weren't grasping the first time around because we were just so focused on there's no God.
Yeah, but the reality is now you understand what you couldn't have understood then.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
And recognize that, like you said, the kind of historical arrogance of reading something like Judges and saying, well, look at these primitive savages. Look at Samson.
I think there's something we can learn.
Like that anymore.
That's why I mentioned the Jubilee year. Yeah, we look at it in kind of an idealistic way, but I think it'd be particularly offensive to people who, try to make a living, on loaning.
Right.
Because it cuts you off at the knees. You just can't do it for very long. And you may actually think twice about ever being indentured to anybody at that point.
Jared asked the question. It might be off topic and you may not have the answer, but do we know if anyone in history only had the book of Judges? Yeah, the people who were living during the time of the Judges.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why they complained and wanted them to go away.
I think he's referring to the manuscripts and the scrolls and everything. Yeah.
I doubt it.
I don't know how popular it was. We don't really know as much about manuscript transmission in the Old Testament as we do with the New Testament.
No.
How do they get compiled?
Like you noted earlier, though, that we usually only know when it's announced, oh, crap, we found these scrolls. We didn't know. And you're like, oh, you didn't think to provide us with that data before I read half the book?
Right, yeah. Look, the scroll of Isaiah. Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. No, because you read, and that's a great point, though. You read the book of Judges, you'll notice what doesn't show up a lot. Scrolls. Readings.
Yeah. Somebody had the thought of we should probably write all this down.
Yeah. Well,
this might be helpful.
This is a whole nother route I'll stop, but the book of Judges, the word judge should more accurately be translated from the Hebrew as warlord or clan leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they were like local warlords, like clan chiefs.
Yeah, it's a fighting king, basically.
Yeah, fighting king is the best way to say it. And that's why they're judge, jury, and executioner. Which then now go back and read about Samson being like a tribal chieftain. And is he ever... No, he's never home.
And he's above the law.
And he's above the law.
Because he is the law. He's
Exactly.
Judge Dredd.
He is Judge Dredd. Yeah, 100%. But with a real bad fetish. He's just... Yeah.
He's got a thing for Philistine women.
He does.
One and done, one night stands, whatever.
Nope. Yeah. Just, that's who he is.
Let's go to Vegas.
Let's go to Vegas. So we'll come back. We'll deal with Hitchens some more.
We should.
If nothing less, I hope that, because reading this stuff for me anyways, it provokes me to think through stuff that I kind of push aside because as a pastor, I don't really have a platform to talk about these things.
You don't have people coming to you to talk to you like this.
No, and I can't bring it up to people because most Christians are just grinding it out day to day anyways. And the last thing that they want me to do is jeopardize their faith. It's like I was talking with Steve about the book. It's like there are sections of the book when I wrote them, I took a week or two off because it affected me so deeply because I'm basically writing a book about how to make a pastor apostatize his faith.
Right.
So I was very honest about it. And I dug deep into my own experience and other people's experiences. And there's just some stuff I was writing about, like with the suicide of a girl. And I'm just like, I got to walk away from this for a while, man, because I can't, I'm starting to question my own belief in God at this point. And as a consequence, Carl Urban's the best Judge Dredd, by the way. That movie's awesome. And they never made a sequel, and I'm mad.
It didn't make enough money.
I know it didn't. Cult status, though. But when a person like Hitchens comes along, I think he's so forcefully against Christianity and religion in general that I think it's a little bit easier than to kind of just let it hit you, because I don't take him as seriously as others.
Yeah.
And maybe that's, again, because of where he's coming from and the church that he's coming out of. And my own atheism was more cultural and came out of my personal experience and my parents' personal experience. And so it was a much more cultural atheism. At that point, I hadn't really studied atheism, so I wasn't well versed in like Bertrand Russell's arguments or like I said, Nietzsche or Feuerbach or others. That was after the fact. That was like much later that I encountered atheism as a Christian. Actually through C.S. Lewis of all people, because Mere Christianity introduced me, and then his biography, Surprised by Joy. Is that the name of it?
Yes.
Yeah, but in his biography, when he talks about struggling with atheism and belief and different philosophers and so forth, then I was like, oh, like I can actually read like a library of people who didn't believe in this stuff like I didn't.
Mm.
And then I found, brothers in arms, comrades, so to speak. But I think it's important for Christians, if they can, if Lord willing, they have the strength of character and conscience to do it, is to subject yourself to arguments against your faith in order to basically separate the dross from the silver.
Yeah.
And recognize you have false gods. I have false gods. And like I was saying to you the other day, like my primary identity is protector. Like that's how I define myself as a man, is a protector, and as a human being, is I'm a protector. And when I can't do that, that's when I'm the most stressed out, anxious, and worried. But that's not my identity. My identity is Christian, baptized child of God. And I'm aware of that, but it doesn't change the fact that most days I'm not focused on being a baptized child of God. I'm focused on being a protector of my family, my church, my team, everybody. And it can really mess me up then. And I have to repent of that. But guys like Hitchens are the ones who force me back to look at that. So I can talk about fatherhood and being a protector and mothers being nurturers and family dynamics and all this stuff. But at the root of it, what I'm really driving toward is my own need to understand where that comes from for myself, that I need to identify it. Not identify, but I need to identify as a protector because it literally gives my life meaning, purpose, and a goal. And without that, if I was stripped of that, I honestly don't know what I would do with myself.
Right. So the question is that inherent to you or culturally or biologically, or, is being opposed upon you by these cultural institutions I think he's ultimately a libertarian. It doesn't seem like he's all that interested in any kind of mandated order.
Sure.
And maybe we'll get more of that as we go forward, but it's certainly not a moral order. And that, I'm reluctant to go there, right? Because I just don't know what that would look like. But that's all ultimately, the problem with the gospel too. If it sets people free, you're like, well, what are they going to do? Exactly. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, 100%. Get some popcorn, and we'll find out together.
Yeah, exactly.
So praise be to Christ for that. All right, folks. Thanks for listening. As always, thanks for supporting the podcast. You're marathoners. We appreciate it. Go check out everything at 1517. You want to donate, go to 1517 Donate. Go check out all the awesome books that are coming out for 1517. Turned in the first draft of my book, The Withered Tongue Emails. I'm still waiting for my editor to get back to me on how terrible or good it is and what needs to be
fixed.
Shock and
awe. It was shock and awe,
baby. So yeah, it's all about an archdemon talking with his tempter, who's been assigned to a young pastor. So that'll be coming out next year. But otherwise, I hope you're well, and I hope God blesses you richly in all that you do in church and in your vocations. Peace.
Yeah.
Just to mess with the editing process.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I've come to not edit as much. Just get rid of stupid stuff and
exactly.
leave the rest. All right. I turned Dropbox back on.
Oh, I forgot to turn it off.
So who knows? I don't know what the glitchy thing is. Yeah.
It's just static popping.
Now you're all blocky. Perfect.
Yeah, now it's uploading.
Okay. I'm going to end the broadcast. Say bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.